everything works.
Sure. And then but we don't stop it, right? Because that screws up everything.
Yep. So we'll just let it go. It will take about a minute or two for it to sync up with YouTube since there's a little lag. But
Okay.
I'll monitor it and I'll let you know when
we
it's.
don't stop it, right? Because that screws up everything. I'm
Yep,
hearing.
so we'll just let it go. So in your background right now, there'll be another browser window. So it will have opened up YouTube, and that's what we're hearing. And I'll let you know.
I see. There it is. Okay, I'll get rid of that. That's what the noise was. It was me talking to myself. Great. Thank you very much, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then if you run into any issues, feel free to just call that number that you called before, and I'll be able to hop on and help out.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Have a great review.
Hi, Barbara. I don't think we've had a chance to meet before. I know you were on a session earlier with some of the students. Andrew Zago, nice to meet you. I don't hear you, actually. Okay. KAIYUN, YIYANG, SIYU, you're all ready? And then we've got I have to go grab something.
Hi, can you guys hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Excellent, thanks.
Hello again.
Hi, Andrew, this time I can actually speak. So
There you go. Perfect. Perfect. Welcome. Thanks for joining us again.
Great pleasure.
We'll have, I'm sorry, it's a little hectic as always happens. One of our critics, Sophie Hochhausl, wasn't able to join us at the last minute. And so I just got someone else, another colleague of mine to join us. So I was, in fact, I have to tell Florencia, so if you'll excuse me for a minute, sorry. Oh, and apparently we are live right now. So my partner just texted me, but you know, you're live. So, so let's see, Niccolo, you're in Greece. Luca, where are you? Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted.
I am in Roma.
Oh, fantastic, great.
Oh.
And Barbara, I assume you're in London?
I am, yes. It's
Fantastic.
London. So yeah, nice evening here actually.
Great. Well, here the sky is eerie yellow-red from all of the fires. I don't know if you've been seeing the photos. Hi, Peter. You're muted.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. Yeah, London does look beautiful out your window, if
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I chose the tree.
oh, beautiful.
We spent the first days of class just figuring out which students were in which time zone.
Oh yeah. Well,
Right.
I'm about 5-minute walk from the AA, 5-minute walk from the Bartlett UCL here. just on Tottenham Court Road. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we have. Hello. Well, maybe, and I know we have, obviously John is joining us, and JasonSchupbach, who I don't know, is supposed to be joining us as well, and Marion Weiss. And then I think David Eskenazi is coming as well, and he'll join us a few minutes later. Sophie Hochhausl is not able to join us today, as it turns out. Great. Peter, have you been on reviews already? Oh, you're muted again.
I was yesterday, yeah, yesterday afternoon. Yeah.
Yesterday afternoon, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we had, it was exciting, it was fun.
Great, great. They go reasonably well, no? They work reasonably well?
Yeah, yeah, no, I thought it was really interesting, actually, it was very good.
Well, it's a lot cheaper now to get international critics, isn't it?
That's right.
That's right. All the exotic guests. Hi, John.
Have budgetary constraints, but we certainly do.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And maybe it's just 10 o'clock now. Maybe KAIYUN and YIYANG, maybe you guys can just turn on your camera as we get going, and then we're still expecting Ozan from your student, John.
Yeah.
That'd be nice if we could just see it. What we're going to ask for the students is maybe when you're not presenting to just turn your camera off. We're actually live right now. Turn your camera off when you're not presenting, except at the beginning and the end for everyone to just say hello. But let's give everyone a couple more. We'll give everyone a few minutes. As far as I know, both Jason and Marion are still joining us. All of my, Julia, are you in Los Angeles? You are, okay. And what about Ozan, is he here?
He is.
He is, yeah. He was in my seminar last semester, so I know he was at least here then. Great. A few things. First of all, welcome everyone. So Peter, John, and myself have students that we've advised that are presenting today. I have YIYANG and SCI-U that you see together in the screen. They have a project they did together jointly, so that's one project. KAIYUN LEI, who you see it with the colorful background. Also, these are my students. KAIYUN will be the second person presenting. Then we have a student, Julia Pike, who is advised by Peter Testa. And then Ozan, is the last name pronounced Cicek?
Yeah, Cicek.
Cicek.
Yeah, trying to contact him. Maybe he's a little early. He's last, so I'm sure he'll get here in due time. I think.
Get here in due time, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, and there's Jason. Hi, Jason. You're muted. We're just starting a couple of introductions. Nice to meet you.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
And we're just still waiting on a couple of people. I was just explaining, I'm Andrew Zago, nice to meet you, and John Enright and Peter Testa. I'm not sure if you know either of them. We'll be looking at, well, three of my students, two projects from students that I advised, one of Peter's and one of John's, over the course of morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be. Are you on the East Coast?
Yes, I'm in Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, fantastic. Okay, so not so bad. So 1 o'clock there. We are waiting for Marion Weiss. We have then one other juror that's isn't able to make it and is, oh, so we have a lot of Philadelphia then. because Sophie Hochhausl is also at UPenn. She's not going to join us. So David Eskenazi will be joining us in a little while. He was just getting to his computer. Well, I guess let me do a little bit of introductions, I suppose. And I know at least, well, Barbara, I know you've been at least virtually at SCI-Arc before. I'm not sure with Niccolo, Luca, and Jason whether you've had a chance to ever either virtually or in person visit SCI-Arc before.
Yes, of course.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Actually, I studied at SCI-Arc one summer many years ago.
No kidding. How many years ago? I taught at SCI-Arc many years ago.
It was probably early 2000.
That's not many years ago. When I was first out of graduate school. When I was first out of graduate school as a little kid, I came out here and started teaching in the late 80s. And then left for a long time, and now I've been back for maybe 11 years or so. But the three of us are, well, not only are we all kind of just rank and file studio and seminar teachers, John is also the not vice director? What is the actual term?
Vice director, chief academic officer.
Yes, not the director of Weiss. That's someone else. Who's that?
That too.
That's Peter, I think.
Yeah, normally we'd all be hungover from the party at my house, which is usually on the Friday before, so we woke up this morning, we're like, oh, so sad we couldn't have a party.
We could, that's right. That's right.
Well, we're hungover anyway.
Well, I didn't want to say, but
we could just start drinking and claim that we're in London also.
Right.
Where it would be perfectly reasonable to have a drink. Great. So here we all are. Ozan, nice to see you. Hey, Ozan, is there any chance you could change the screen name? I think it's easy to do. If you could, just because it'll make it for people that don't know you. That I don't need the TA for. All of a sudden, I had to go live, and I've done it before, and I just couldn't remember what button to hit, and so Kyle had to come on and explain it. The little dots, more dots at the bottom. And we have a few minutes. What's that?
There's Ozan. Okay, great.
Great. Nope, still says Barak Selik. It's okay. Well, so welcome everyone. So this is the SCI-Arc graduate thesis. As I think a lot of you know that it's been this way for a number of years, where thesis at SCI-Arc for the graduate students happens over the summer, and it's an extra final semester. So people are either here in a 2-year program or a 3-year program, depending on their background. And this would be either their I guess their 5th or 7th. Oh, there's David. Hi, David. Their 5th or 7th semester. And perversely enough, then the thesis is finished into the first week of fall classes. So all the classes, we had a holiday here on Monday. Classes began on Tuesday. We all had studios, although no one quite attended anything because everyone was involved with their people they're advising and the reviews that have been going on. They started yesterday morning. They continue today and tomorrow afternoon. When it was in person, it would continue through Sunday morning. Sunday afternoon, we all go into the parking lot where there's a giant shade structure done by a faculty member, Marcelo Spina and his partner, and we would have graduation. And the undergraduates who finish in the spring, they would come, a lot of them, a huge number of them would also come back and show up. And it's a big old party. I told Peter and John, I've told all of my students that they just have to come back next year for graduation. I'll take them all out for drinks. So I'm not putting any pressure on you, but I did tell them that. Your students heard me say that. So I am pressuring you. Let's do this. Here's what I think I was asked to do this. And so what we'll do is we have about 45 minutes each. I'm really, my feeling about reviews is really regardless of what one thinks of a project, some projects generate a lot of discussions and some don't. I tend to let a review naturally run its course. It's a little difficult this time, only because we have people all around the world and family members and others, colleagues that are turning into the reviews. And so I've been asked to please keep it on schedule. So I'll cut you short if we're going short, and let's make small talk if it the opposite direction. We're good. We'll keep to the 45 minutes each as best we can. Let's see. Wait, Niccolo, you were here in the summer. What summer? 2002?
I think it was probably 2003. I should check back, but I think it was. Probably the first year that Hernan Diaz Alonso was teaching at SCI-Arc, or the first or the second year.
I only asked because I did an installation in the gallery before I taught here, which was the first thing in the gallery, and that may have been, it was in the summer. I don't know if it was that. It was a crazy wood thing. I'd like to do this. I think this is what Florenzi asked us to do for the sake of trying to build up a kind of, I have everyone's dossier here, but I think the idea was that one by one, maybe you can introduce yourselves, which I hope doesn't strike you as my being rude. And if you want, I can just read what my maybe incorrect information I have here. But we thought that way everybody can, you can all introduce yourselves. And I'm going to just, if you don't mind, I'll call on you in the order that you happen to show up on my screen. Again, for the students, it's really nice right now. Maybe we'll also, you guys can all just say hi, one each. And then what we'll do is after we're done, jurors, if you don't mind, please keep your camera on. Students, please, only the students that are presenting, keep your camera on and turn yours off. I think when we're all done, we'll ask you to all come back on again. Take a bow. Okay. So maybe we can start, Niccolo, with you.
Yeah. Okay. My name is Niccolo Casas. I'm an Italian architect. I'm a visiting professor at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. And during this year, I've been also collaborating with Texas A&M, and I'm really glad and enjoying it. I'm as well a PhD candidate at the Bartlett, where Marion Colletti is working as my supervisor. I run a multidisciplinary practice for architecture and design, and I've been working in a lot of different fields, from medicine to fashion tech, automotive design, and so on. And I had the great pleasure to work with and collaborate with fantastic women, and I'm pleased to tell their name. So Anouk Wipprecht and Iris van Herpen, of course. And so I think that's shortly, that's it.
Okay, great, thank you. Luca?
My name is Luca Galofaro. I am a professor in the University of Camerino, but I also have my practice until 2016 was Jan Plus, and now is my personal office. And in the last year, I was also the curator of the Biennale of Architecture of Orléans at the Frac Center. And this is why I was last year in LA, because there was a big selection of people from the school that they are part of the installation with Hernan.
I didn't hear about that. I'm joking. Go ahead.
That's it.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Barbara.
Oh, right. What can I tell you? Well, I taught for many years at the AA, and then in the last little while, I've been at the Bartlett at UCL in London also. And in January, I stepped in as acting director of the School of Architecture in probably the worst possible year. So I would say it's as anyone who's headed up a school will know, it's a very, very onerous job. And you put COVID on top of that, it's spectacular. But we've done it, and fantastic colleagues. And so here I am. It's a pleasure to be here. and I look forward to seeing the work. And I had a quick look at all your stuff on the web, and I liked your hellos in person, the little moments when you summarized your project in 5 words. And yeah, it'd be fun to be here.
Great. Jason.
Hi, I just moved to Philadelphia. I'm the new dean of the Westphal College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel University. I came from being the director of the design's largest and most comprehensive design school in America. Sorry, that's what we always used to say. In Arizona State, where Michael Rotundi actually has a position. So I have that relationship with SCI-Arc. But before that, I was at the National Endowment for the Arts, which is one of America's agencies that supports arts and culture. And it's the primary agency that supports design. And during the Obama years, I was basically the person that supported the design industries, including architecture, which is how I met Florencia, because I had her on panels. So, you know, I gave money to SCI-Arc. I've had enormous respect for the institution for many years. So yes, this is a terrible time to start a new job. Yes, I confirm that, Barbara. So, we also are dealing in America with, you know, a very serious and important uprising around structural racism, and Philly is a 43% Black city, so those issues are also incredibly present. So yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. This is going to be fun. I'm really excited to see the work.
Great. And then David, I know you're here. You're part of the rank and file, but I didn't introduce you.
It's okay. I'll keep it short. I'm another faculty here at SCI-Arc, also a thesis faculty, and I have a LA-based practice called Desk, and that's all I'll say about myself. Just keep it nice and short.
I believe Marion Weiss is supposed to be joining us as well, and of course, I'm sure a lot of you know her. She's co-founder of Weiss Manfredi in New York, and a professor of architecture at UPenn. And so that way we don't have to, well, if she joins us, I'll explain that. I've already did thorough introduction. One who needs no introduction. All right, well, now if we can ask maybe the students to, just say your name very quickly, and then it's time for us to start. Perfectly on time. YIYANG, and see you, just introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is YIYANG Sang. I'm from Shanghai, China.
And my name is SIYU, and also from Shanghai.
KAIYUN, you're muted.
Hi, I'm KAIYUN LEI. I'm from Shenzhen, China.
Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia. I came to LA from Colorado, so an American.
Ozan.
Hey, my name is Ozan. I'm from Ankara, Turkey.
Fantastic. Okay, so if Ozan, Julia, and KAIYUN, if you don't mind, and we'll let me make sure I allow screen sharing, and I'll let you guys take it away, and we'll have approximately 45 minutes for each presentation. Go ahead.
Let's share the screen.
You see that?
Yes.
Hello everyone. So this thesis is a super-scale housing project named the Brugge Complex, which is located in the PIKE backyard, downtown LA. So our site is on the east of Union Station of Los Angeles, and on the northern end of SCI-Arc alongside the LA River. And it is separated by 2 highways. One is the Mission Road from north to south, and the other way is the East Chas Avenues from east to west directions. So when people talk about housing nowadays, the first thing we're gonna consider is the room size, the bedroom or bathroom account, or which floor is the unit. We'd like to break these trends and encourage people to think of the space out of their potential instead of their functions. So this is the complex that we created for our thesis. It's like a map also indicates our methodologies. We start from very basic single housing units, then develop them into blocks and certain scale neighborhoods. and eventually using a post-parametric way to establish a new housing pattern mode for modern city and life.
So start with the housing unit. So normal housing unit is restricted in plans and with no possibilities in space. So we desire to explore the possibilities of housing. So in order to create unexpected space and manually forge conflict role play that only fit in certain situations. So the methodology we use in housing unit is to transfer from one existing housing unit to another one by gradually shifting each functional room in its space properties. So one of the starting points is Le Corbusier's famous housing unit, you can see here. And also you can see from this diagram how one unit is transferred step by step. Each room changes its width, length, height, and position gradually. So through this method, we create a lot of units. So these are only 2 examples of all the units, and we have more and more. So all the 120 units drawings are on the Miro board. We will share the link after our presentation if you want to have a look. So because of the methodology, many function space overlap with each other, which not only makes the whole unit more flexible, but also inspire us to imagine the unexpected activities in these spaces. So using the concept of role plan as our reference, our stores merge and all the space related to each other, which generates so many possibilities for people to explore. So like this detailed section drawing shows, some spaces are so low that it's not suitable for adults, but it's a great secret base for kids. So just like the stair maze shown in the first collage, so children can find their own way to play. Or maybe a busker could own her own place to perform the play. Or someone with his pets could have a rest together underneath a tree. Or people from different cultures may meet occasionally. So everything could happen in our complex due to the variations of housing spaces. So besides the unusual spaces, our housing units are unique in functionality. So we have one unit that has 3 bedrooms, but no bathroom, you can see here, which means people living in this unit have to share a bathroom with neighbors. Or we generate one that only has one kitchen with no bedrooms, which makes these units become a kind of public activity space. So everyone or every family can find their own lifestyle here. So here is a chunk of our model. So from this point on, we're trying to combine single housing units into a block.
Okay. So then we move from the small things to the middle scale things into blocks. Before we doing that, we did a research on the space, the blocking, the population density in certain areas in Los Angeles. So in order to get the proper housing density that we should produce, we choose 3 different areas in downtown. One is the Boyle Heights, one is the downtown LA central area, one is the Toy District. The numbers under the name of these 3 districts is the population densities of this space, which we find that in the high-rise, the most high-rise concentration area in downtown central area, it provides the most suitable density, high population densities for people to live in. So what we want to do is like we produce an area with low rise, but it's high densities in mat-like buildings. So we choose to produce a large amount of low-rise houses like adjacent to each other to contribute to the effect of high-rise product. And we start, before we get our own pattern, we dig into some paintings of Madrid and the Biggie Woogie and the Pete Brown's architecture drawings. Both of them provided us the idea of using units as the compositions of line works. Instead of following the grid they create, those kind of units themselves work as the frameworks. So which also leads to our own circulation map building logic. Well, let's look at the famous Free University in Berlin, most of the historical map building is using the grid-based design logic. They always get the grid done first. They add units into this void space. While what we did is in the opposite way. We got our units stacked and occupy the space side first. Then using the void that created by units to contribute the circulation systems as its own generated from the units. And this is our own complex, the first draft version of the complex patterns, which indicates our idea of the units-based circulation systems. Black indicates those kind of living space. Gray stands for the semi-open space, and white space indicates for the public open space later can be adjusted. And then we, based on the patterns we have, this would be the master plan of our project. It is developed from our original plan. We took away a few space, a first part of the units that may block to leave more room to the green space and semi-open public space. So we start thinking the activities in our complex. We'd like to introduce every life, different lifestyles in there. The ideal form of the new map building lifestyle is to contain every aspect of our daily life. Everything could happen there, through hospital, all those things was contained in the complex, and each room has different functions, different potentials that we created. And if you zoom in the plan, we find each unit is different from each other. No matter how the space stack up volume into each other, the potential of space is what we want to keep. These units tend to provide residents more choice of lifestyles and also more choice of communication way in the neighborhood. These two joints, which indicates that the possibility of our project. Rooms can be joined together. Units is not simply divided by work, but by its potential usage. The way people thinking of the space provide a definition of the space. And this drawing is showing the vertical circulation systems in our project. We have the grid that emerges from our units, and that also in certain point using the units as the vertical circulations to people to get through the entire complex. There are another sections of that. So the site was kind of in part of the boogie backyard, not just completely like a aggressive rocks on it, but gradually has the potential of modular space to be expanded into this entire area. We leave the blank space to for future expansion of our complex. It's like block by block and square by square. And this is the model of our project. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Do you want to post your the link to the Miro board? Which I don't know. I assume I don't know if the jurors know that, but this is a kind of pinup working space. Where you could look through and see the things individually if you like.
Okay, it's in the chat. There's a link to everyone.
I'm sorry?
It's in the chat. Just put a link in the chat.
Okay. Well, you could, maybe you can also go back to, maybe you can share your screen with the board in case, as the discussion goes, you can zoom in on different things. We never quite figure out after the presentation what's the right working space, by the way. So if anyone has any better ideas, please.
Yeah, they should combine Zoom and Miro.
You know, they have apparently a chat function in Miro, but I've heard it doesn't work very well. So
I didn't know at all.
Andrew, shall I just dive in? How do you want to do?
Yes, please.
I mean, I can't see. I mean, on my screen, everyone, I don't have any kind of like hands that flash up or anything. So I'm just going to like impertinently start, and then others can improve on my first observation. Well, firstly, YIYANG and SIYU, I really enjoyed the project. I'm a great fan of collaborative projects. I think they're incredibly difficult, but very important. And that whole notion of engaging with others and think, particularly other people who think maybe differently from oneself is great. So great to see you both on screen speaking very fluently about your work. I was quite, I suppose, there are many things I could bring up, but I will just start with one, which is that I'm very interested in your project. I was particularly intrigued where you started mentioning what I would call useless space or wasted space, and you referred to these sort of areas where only children could go, and I'm imagining maybe insects or cats or dust and stuff like that. And I was really intrigued at how one incorporates this extra space, this very valuable, delightful additional space that probably confounds the way floor areas are measured and how things are used. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit more briefly about that, because I then looked at your plans and there were sort of thicker walls, which I presume were for service ducts or something really practical like that. And I was thinking, actually, pochade space is also this kind of special wasted space that often adds to quality. And then you have ceiling heights that can be generously high and sort of useless in that way. They're not sort of low and just high enough for us to walk under. And so one can waste vertically in another kind of way. So my question to you is, what is at stake in this project? What is the most important, crucial and essential element that if you pared it back, that is what the project hinges on? That's what I'm really interested in.
Okay, so I think the most important part of this project will be focusing on housing units and how it actually grows up and generating into the entire complex. So we put a lot of effort into the unit like experiment, from very little single units to like 120, 200 unit experiments. The use this is a definition that differs on certain conditions. And if people can use it to the child, they are not use it, but to the adult, if we want to use it, it becomes certain useless space. So what we want to do is to make those kind of useless space that happened in the moving and boarding process to be useful to certain situations. And that would be the key point and the most crucial point of this project. And what is the interesting thing is how to take the advantage of those kind of useless space and then to redevelop into the entire neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. I have a couple, it's a very intriguing project, congratulations. It's really interesting to me, your thought process at how you arrived at this, when the architectural outcome reminds me a lot of, I don't want to use the word, the derogatory word slums, but it reminds me a lot of kind of spaces that get built without architects necessarily outside of major cities and places like India. It's interesting to see how this very sort of Western thought basis kind of arrived at a design that it reminds me of something from another place. So that's just more the selfish thing I think that I thought was really interesting. I think most of my comments will really be about the user and who you imagine being in the space. And LA is this incredibly diverse world-class city. And I think you've happened upon something here which solves a real problem I've seen in a lot of LA housing, is that it is not necessarily built to match the diverse cultures of the place, right? I learned this lesson in Arizona. Many Latinx families, I'm generalizing and stereotyping here, the whole family lives together for their entire life, right? The children stay in the house the grandmother lives in the same house. And so the fact that this project can reflect and adapt to the different cultural norms of the families that might live in it is really interesting as it builds out to me, right? I think there's a real gem of an idea here. I have one trouble with it that I want to ask you about, which is everyone that you show is able-bodied. There's an enormous amount of stairs. I'm thinking of people who are not as able-bodied about how they would live in the project, and was wondering about how you might, how and if you thought about that. That's my question. So congratulations. I think it's really, you happened upon a really interesting idea for a very diverse city. It's really interesting to me. But I am curious about if you thought about people who were not able-bodied.
So basically, what we showed here is like the most complicated spaces in our project. So it's like you can see all the stairs here, but actually in our, if you get deep in our plan, we actually have a part of our project is so basically, you can see where our perspective views are zooming this part. Also, we consider about all these like people who are not very suitable for the stairs. So we actually have an area that are very like flat for them to use.
I mean, Barbara did touch on that a lot of these more complex spaces that you showed are really a place of joy, a place of interest, a place of great intrigue. And so I just, that shouldn't be kept away from the people who are able-bodied also. I would hope that, those same level of complexity and intrigue that you're generating with some of those spaces would be available to everyone. That's sort of my point.
Just an interjection. I was having this discussion with someone a little while ago. I mean, they were very interested in the kind of Lothian realm plan, obviously, and that remains such a compelling idea within architecture. And so fundamentally at odds with accessibility, that we have this like giant diagram hanging over our discipline. And we, then this would always be the question. Either you greatly compromise the realm plan.
Well, it could be though, I mean, could you guys go to the isometric? I think it's the next slide after this, or, yeah. Oh, great drawing. I really like this drawing. It could have been just more subtle kind of ramping and other ways to do it in combinations with stairs. So I totally agree with Jason's comment, but solvable, I think. One would just have to kind of be happy with more subtle kind of grade changes, I would guess, in the up and down. There's something really nice at the urban level of this project of taking the kind of crenellated single or duplex figure ground milieu of LA and kind of feeding that in, but in a contained volume. I very much like that it's in a square and in a defined position. You could have made it leak and kind of go all over the place and aggregate all over the landscape, but the fact that it's in a very distinct area makes it, to me, a kind of neighborhood, which is also kind of intriguing. And I liked the data on the trying to understand the numbers of people and what a community is. And I'm not sure what the conclusion was of that exactly, but I like that you looked at it and compared it to different kind of densities in Los Angeles. One, I kind of would like to see two things maybe addressed more, and I know they show up in the model and things like that. One is the roofscape, while I like this drawing, maybe another one of showing the roofs. What are they? Are they accessible? Are they not? As a kind of escape in the city, just like the round plan being the ground plane. There's this other plane above, and the other is the edges. Like what kind of facade, it's very different to have an internal, to be in this amazing place internally, and then to see it on the outside. Ultimately someone gets the kind of corner room or an outside edge, and just dealing with that would be intriguing. Like maybe there's no windows on those actually, it's like completely always internal. But somehow addressing that edge, I think, would have been interesting.
Okay. First of all, congratulations for the project. Is really, really interesting. I probably would have like 3 or 4 questions. So that means that it's really, really nice and really interesting project. But, you know, it's 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I was in Los Angeles, and I have this friend that was looking for an accommodation without kitchen. And, you know, it's for me was completely, you know, strange as European, as Italian. We love to cook and so on. And, but actually there may be a place where to find a place to stay, you know, a house without a kitchen. And I think that the fact that you play with the program and in a way you deconstruct the program is one of the strongest and most interesting part of your project. It reminds me to certain discourse of Rem Koolhaas, but also certain discourse of Graham Harman that is teaching at SCI-Arc about having a program that is not completely framed, that is not determinate in a way. So my 2 questions are, we are all experiencing the COVID situation, and we are forced, and we may be forced in the future to spend more and more time in our houses. So in Europe, the tendency is to react by creating balconies, terraces, and all these sort of open spaces without the private houses. So I was wondering if the COVID changed your approach to the project in terms of the program, and also if you are thinking about a certain kind of flexibility within the program, not only in the moment you propose different units with different radical different programs inside, but also in the moment one unit can change its own program and identity.
I think there was a question.
Yeah.
Was like connection problems.
Okay. Okay. So the idea is basically if you are thinking about the possibility to have a certain kind of flexibility within the program of the singular cells, the single unit. And the second one, if your experience with the COVID has changed your approach to your project, since actually you're working on units and a way of collective activities.
Oh yeah, especially during this pandemic period, like Andrew would once talk to us about to think about if COVID-19 happened in our complex, what shall we like deal with it? So we actually think of that like the cinema seats, like one occupied with people, the other one next to it is empty, and then another is empty, then another one seat is available for people. So if there's a pandemic happening in the complex, what we may think is like one unit is available for people to live in, the other unit may be turned into the public use. And then the other one next to the public use can be available for living. So just half of the room, half of the units turns into public use, make the circulations like automatically it will kind of divide people into that. So it's like flexibilities. Some rooms can be turned off, some rooms can be changing to semi-open space. That kind of certainly lower the density of the entire complex.
Unless it's already occupied.
Yeah.
So our units is very flexible for the user.
I have a question, if I can make it, because okay, I don't want to discuss about the project. I like this project as a object, but what I cannot understand from the drawing is the relationship between the housing project and the city. I think that this is of course, it's an important issue for an European architect, because we have this hierarchy between the different space that we can use. And in fact, What I like most of your project is about the question of Niccolo did, is all this space in between. I think that for the COVID are really successful space for the building. I used to live in a building where I never used the terrace on the roof, but because it's a common space, I never use in 10 years that space. And I spent 4 months on my terrace during this lockdown. So I believe that space in between, it's quite the most interesting part of the project. But for me, my question is about which kind of relationship the house have with the street, with the piazza, and with the big infrastructure that you have in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is the city of car. You need to move by car most of the time. So and for me, working in a housing project in Los Angeles could be interesting also for that point of view, which kind of relationship exists between the building and the road, and which kind of relationship between the user and the street, how the people move from the building to the street and to the city.
So I would like to consider the entire complex as a small city itself. So like each unit would be kind of, if you consider it's a building, not just a room, it's like a small urbanism inside this complex. So what I would consider is to thinking of the units as some kind of basic accountable unit that people walk through it. If you walk in the certain circulations, you consider it's a street. And how it's like one ward to the other ward. You come into the complex, you feel it's in entirely enclosed neighborhood, and entirely another some kind of suburban idea, concept of that. It's to keep you, if you inside from health cities, but once you get out, there's like not so certain boundaries to blur it. You can also, it's in a public space. So it's like two kind of different feelings on the different space into the complex.
So imagining the building as a micro city, and this is a very nice concept, my question is, you have not just housing inside, but you need to consider inside the building also other kind of program, I believe. Yeah. Okay.
Can I
so let's be more clear in the drawing, because the drawing are very beautiful, but it's very interesting also to read the drawing, because I saw the project before in the link, and for me it was really unclear the difference between the housing, the other facility inside the project. Drawing, it's very important from that point of view, no? Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew, I was just going to pick up on Luca's point, and in a way also, perhaps on some of the others, just very briefly. It's my turn, but I just have a very short point really, which was to YIYANG and SCI-U, which was, have you actually listened to Boogie Woogie? Have you actually seen the size of hands that play Boogie Woogie? Because there's something amazing about really great Boogie Woogie, which is all improvisational. It's very emotional and very, it sort of changes on each piano, it changes with each set of hands. And I suppose going back to what Luca was saying about the relationship to the city, I'm really curious how your project would play or engage with things like weather or shadow or wind or time. How does it age? And whether where that interaction occurs, so that maybe in the low relief that John was talking about in roofscapes or this sort of spaces between buildings that have just been talked about, that the usefulness or the unusefulness or the improvisation of the use of those spaces, whether it's in a COVID situation or in other forms of living and occupation, how we improvise with the structures that you have got, and where is the project unforgiving?
So I think first it's like So now we are linking off the facade of the connections to the urbanism. So if we want to solve those kind of weather and climate problems, of course, we have to have the roof-like designs. For now, what we're thinking of is like using the balcony and the open spaces for the flexibility to deal with those climate problems. But for the further, I think certain part of the complex, it can be changed into certain function areas. Each, like we have a super like ultra scale urban design. Part of it can be turned into another solutions to those kind of, to deal with those kind of situations. Part of the blocks, it can be taken away, not take away. It's just like not work as housing apartment anymore, but some kind of facilities that can produce some kind of resources to deal with those kind of climate problems or COVID-19. Part of those communities certainly like moves out and changes functions into hospital or some things like that.
Thank you.
I've seen the project a few times over the summer, so I'll keep it short again, but I want to congratulate you guys on getting to the final. One thing I'm curious, because the one thing I have seen over the summer exchange, and as I look at it now, this drawing in particular, it has been that you've had an interest in, obviously you kind of referenced the boogie woogie. You made that one drawing, which I think is quite beautiful, the drawing of like the kind of striated systems kind of coming together. And where you end at this point is quite different than that in terms of thinking through, let's say, organizing systems of like all these discrete parts. And it seems like the project has some kind of space between like variation and repetition, and ends in some place, at least that's where you begin, and it kind of ends somewhere where it's now more of like a kind of erosion or something, like a sort of mass that's been eroded, but that's structured around some sort of larger scaled grid, I suppose, like some kind of bigger scale proposal. I don't know. I wonder if like how one would describe that as a kind of addition to the discipline. Like if there's been a lot of like micro housing projects, you know, I think we can think of like the MAT building or other kind of smaller housing proposals. Those obviously all confront the problem of like repeating units, and your drive to make them all individualized is quite difficult, as you probably know. And the thing that like strikes me is that there's things that seem like they repeat, but quite maybe possibly don't exactly repeat. There's living situations or arrangements that probably reoccur, but we're not, you know, but maybe not exactly the same way. And I'm wondering like if the formal, let's say, ambition of the project, like this kind of clear boundary with not necessarily a clear center, definitely a field situation, but that's a different kind of field than, let's say, most housing proposals we know of. Whether that affords an ability for you to produce these variations, or whether you sort of find yourself actually repeating certain living situations. Because it seems to me like there's a little bit of both, and I'm trying to figure out: do you end up somewhere new from previous, let's say, housing proposals, in the sense that it's new formally, or is it also new in a kind of radical way to live? And I think it's kind of somewhere in the middle, is my guess, of both of those, and I find that like pretty interesting as a place to land for a thesis.
So basically for us, it's like this complex is more not only provide variation, but also like to satisfy some like normal people's requirements. It's like this complex can satisfy both people in the city, to like maybe some young would like to have more like challenge in the space, or like to explore more different lifestyles in our complex, but also someone just need like very normal housing units. So basically, we are trying to manage both the requirements for these people. Yeah.
I mean, I really love this section, like the amount of it feeling like a kind of excavation rather than an addition into the city. And when you look at the photos of the model at the end, it seems like there's a lot of work that you do with the ground, like that kind of gray material that sort of separates, in some sense, the project from everything else. And it seems to lift it above, let's say, the ground plane of the city, although in that section, it doesn't seem like it, or maybe it does, I'm not sure. It seems a little bit different, but there's this sense that not only can you produce something which is like a field, like many parts that sort of repeat and go on infinitely, but that they not only are bounded by the square, but then they're somehow elevated a little bit off the ground. And so it sort of makes it more of like a figure, an object itself. Like the housing proposal is something that you occupy, but it's something that you can see and identify in like a very clear way, while it itself is a bit ambiguous. You know, there's all these like crenellations, and it's hard to sort of say that it's one specific shape over another. And I think that that's a pretty interesting move, but I'm curious exactly what that gray stuff is and how it really sort of produces a new relationship to the ground. And I don't know, maybe I'm misreading the section. I have a hard time understanding that stuff in the section, but I like that proposal. I like that the way it sort of appears in those models. It's pretty beautiful.
If there is time for last question, I'd like to go back really briefly to what Luca was talking to. So the relation with what is with the surrounding and the landscape. I really love the idea of having a closed city that is independent, that has a spaceship arrived and creates its own identity and its own way to live. And for my specific research and ideas, I'm really interested in the things that are not mediated, so they're not organic, so that there is not a soft mediation between what is inside and outside. But the boundary, I think it's always really interesting. If you think about ancient cities, in Italy, they had like big walls to protect the city or perhaps the water and so on. So if it was my project, probably I would like put a camera and just try to understand what is happening on the boundary, on the limits of your micro city and the relation with what you have outside. That doesn't mean to have to be organically mediated. You know, it can be a really strong act, but it would, especially since we are interested in useless space that can activate certain kind of situation, I would be really, really curious to see what is happening all around your project.
Great. Terrific. We might let that be a last comment. Although I did want to just go back to Barbara's first comment about collaboration, because I never let my thesis students collaborate. Although there's lots of other occasions, but these guys arrived already as a team, joined at the hip. And so what they didn't explain, they differentiated themselves, and SIYU was really working on the units, and YIYANG was working on the urban agglomeration. And so it's sort of architect and planner. And so I kept calling them Ludwig and Ludwig. I don't know if you can see my screen here. Ludwig Hilbersheimer and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Okay. And Marion, thank you for, Marion Weiss has joined us. I already gave a little introduction to you before you came here, so it wouldn't be.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm delayed. Tunnel traffic in New York was unpredictable, so we have.
Traffic is back. I was in the horrible traffic on the 5 freeway yesterday. I haven't seen that in months.
I know, as if it's back to normal, at least on the.
As if it's back to normal. And of course, a principal of Weiss Manfredi and a professor at UPenn. We're gonna go on then to the next project. And what I was saying, Marion, normally I like to let projects run long or run short, depending how the conversation naturally goes. We are not in natural times, and because people are tuning in from different places, including families and colleagues, I'm going to either compress or string along the discussion so we fall into 45 minutes. And I'm in fact doing it right now because it's only 10:58 and we've got another 2 minutes. So
filibuster.
I'm gonna read this little poem here that I just wrote for. In any case, maybe you guys can unshare.
But thank you very much for showing us your project. It was it's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, you guys. And then Marion, you may or may not know the other people. I won't do full introductions, but we have Barbara Campbell-Lange joining us from London. Niccolo Casas is in Greece en route to Italy. Luca Galofaro is in Rome. JasonSchupbach is in Philadelphia. And you are in New York or in Philadelphia right now? You're in New York. And then Peter Testa, John Enright, myself, and David Eskenazi. Peter and John have also have, the next student will be mine as well, as were these two. And then we go on to students of Peter and John, and then David Eskenazi, who's our colleague as well, is joining us today. So thank you. And KAIYUN, if you want to make an appearance.
I do want to just congratulate YIYANG and SCI-U on a great piece of work here. Really great project.
Good job.
Hi, I'm going to share my screen. Hi, I'm KAIYUN Lei. My project is International Opera House. It's a competition in Shenzhen, China. I'm trying to design a new type of opera house. Although opera originated in Europe, with the development of globalization, the opera house has become an essential building in most modern cities in the world. With the rise of various new performing art forms, opera is not as popular as it used to be. Especially in Asia, where many countries have huge cultural differences from Europe. The opera house is almost a decoration for the city's ambition with only a few audience. This thesis is to create a new type of opera house, not just for Western opera. It may also better present local opera from traditional culture and the new genres of contemporary drama. The site is located in Shenzhen, which is a fast-growing city in southern China. The city on the other side of the sea is Hong Kong, which is a city with the same traditional culture as Shenzhen, but different political system and ideology. This is a good site to practice my thesis. Hong Kong has had many ideological conflicts with mainland China in recent years. I'm powerless to solve this conflict, but the conflict caused by the cultural differences can highlight the necessity of this thesis. The orange area is the site. The north side of the site is residential area. The west of the site is commercial area and a shipping port. And you can see there is a bridge on the east of the site. It's linking these two cities. Speak about the opera house. My way to improving the opera house is to make the stage into a rotatable ring end to end. When the circular stage starts to rotate as needed, the scene will be switched continuously and the audience enjoyment of the opera will not be interrupted. The audience could have a better experience than the typical opera house. Above is a typical opera house scene switch, in which the audience has to wait for the scenes to change. The picture below is how the rotatable stage switch the scene. The scene will continue to switch naturally as the story progresses. Compared with the movie, the most valuable part of opera is that it allows the audience to truly and directly enjoy the performance of actors. In order to make this more obvious, the circular stage can also become an immersive theater. The audience can walk onto the stage and enjoy the performance.
Is your speaker up?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. You're just pausing. Sorry.
So,
a dramatic pause, sorry.
As you can see, the actors and the audience, they are all step into the stage, and they share the whole scene, and which is very helpful to let the audience to enjoy the story of the drama. And this project is located in China, so it is necessary to prepare a suitable theater for the local drama and provide the local with the way they are used to enjoy the local drama. Chinese opera has very different requirements for the theater than Western opera. It's usually in a very open place. The environment is very noisy, and the actors expect immediately feedback from the audience. Therefore, the circular stage is not only a conveyor belt for the scene. Each part of the ring can be open as an outdoor stage for the public. Broadly speaking, I hope to use this circular stage to practice the possibility of a new type of opera house in these 4 aspects. This project requires 3 theaters: a grand theater, a music hall, and a multi-purpose theater. I want to connect the 3 theaters with a circular stage that can be rotated and shaped. These 3 theaters can work independently as they do as usual, or they can share the stage and work as a new type of theater. As I mentioned earlier, the Opera House is not only a building that contains a theater, but also a monument to the city's ambition. In the past, because of the technological limitations, landmarks were often shaped like a pyramid, with the empire standing at the top and controlling everything he could see. With the development of human civilization, landmarks tend to inverted pyramid. The shape not only shows the technological power of defying gravity, but the high platform is the symbol of freedom and openness. While the people on the top of the building changed from a person to a group, there was still a minority. At this inverted pyramid, the people above is risky to get down, and the people below is hard to climb up. Class rigidity has indeed become the most obvious political issue of the day. I believe that an architectural shape with the characteristics of the time must reflect the mainstream ideology at the time to some extent. It may be politically difficult for different people on the different level to move with each other. But in architecture, all I need to do is very simple, which is just to provide a stairs for them to work on. As a conclusion, a climbable pyramid with a sky plaza containing the ring stage is the core idea of the Opera House. This page is to show how I combined the ring and the pyramid. I designed a landscape ramp that wound around the ring and then create a volume to support the ramp. the picture left is Empire's Palace 1,000 years ago. I consider it as a big theater, but the only audience is the king, who can stand on the top of the roof and watch their armies doing shows on the platform. But today, in my opera house, in my theater, who's standing on the top of the building is not only one, but the citizen. And this is a section to show the public space and the solid space. And this is the view from the ship. And this is showing how, when people reach the peak of the building, what they can see. And the picture above showing the main entrance on the west of the building. People from the residential area, that they will use this entrance. And the picture below showing another entrance, which is for the tourists. This is the view from the ocean. This is showing the main space, main public space of the building. And now I'm going to show the animation of the project. That's it. I just typed the link in the chat.
You put both the Miro and the Vimeo link for the animation, is that right? It was, for me, it was running a little bit in steps, but it's okay. I think we get the idea.
That's it.
Thank you.
Any comment?
KAIYUN, I really loved the presentation. I thought it was a really interesting way to sort of pull together your thoughts on a kind of political issue and like architectural form. And I thought that that was really quite wonderful, and also program in relationship to that form. So it was really, really clear, and I really enjoyed that. So I'm still trying to unpack the project for myself, but I thought that was beautiful. Thank you.
I could dive in just for a moment. Thank you very much, KAIYUN. I think the title "Endless Stage" is a fascinating way to frame the project, or start the project. Also, the question of opera, and I suppose I often think architecture itself is a kind of an opera, because of the way it brings many forms of being together, both physical and metaphysical, one might say. But I wondered, in terms of precedents or influences, whether you had looked at people like Kiesler's Endless House or Rem's Jussieu Library, or projects that had a sort of toroidal or sort of torus-like component, where in a sense there's a continuousness or a single surface. Because I suppose my question, and I enjoyed the idea of this sort of panoramic stage that was the audience, a bit like a street, one was continually in the opera as a member of the audience, and so there was a blurring between, shall we say, actor or performer and public, that is no longer, that distinction is no longer clear. But I wondered, when your boulevard staircase wraps around the way I see it in your project, why it doesn't also connect continuously to itself. So almost the way it meets the ground, could it not continue itself also? So that's my question.
Continue, you mean the ramp is not a loop?
Yeah, why is that not a loop also?
Actually, let me show you. I mean, you can see the ramp. There is a hole on it, and in the other end of the ramp, you can also see an entrance to the building. So for the outside of the ramp maybe it's not a loop, it's not continuing, but it can connecting the inside of the building. So it's still a continual routine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go Luca.
KAIYUN, I just want to, there is one beautiful idea that I really like in the project, but I can give to you a reference project to study, to rethink your project. No? It's a small theater made by Lina Bobardi, the Teatro Officina in São Paulo in Brazil. No? And this theater is not a theater anymore. It's a street. It's a long corridor of 55 meters where the actor play, moving through this. So this is why the title, the concept of the project is the theater is the road, the street. So you have this long 55 meters stage, and all the public is not on the chair, but is on the wall. So the public is on different level. Have a look to one photo that for sure you can find it on the web. But the interesting thing that is a kind of reinvention of the typology. So in your project, there are these two interesting elements. That one is the rotating stage, no? So that it's the scene and the play change, and every time that is moving have a different relationship with the city, with different room of the opera house. But there is the second element that it's something similar that transform the city in a stage. Is this kind of path that you have on the roof. So from my point of view, you have two different roads. Now, one is just using the concept of Lina Bobardi. One is the interior one, where you can reinvent the way of using an opera house and a theater. And the second one is this path that you can take from the hall, from that space that we are looking now in the video, and you can walk through the roof of the building, and from the building you look at the city. So in that sense, you are transforming. No, you have two different ways of performing. One is the performance that you have inside the theater, but one is the performance that the city play every day. So there is two different public, one that use the theater inside and the public space outside. So from my point of view, these are the two most important elements of your project, no? So, but at the same time, the object looks like a theater, no? So in that sense, I think that if you want to improve your project, you need really work more with these two important concepts that you have in the project, that they're really very beautiful. And of course, I really like the building. I don't want to say, but your declaration at the end, you want to do something new. And to do this, you reinvent the opera house, you reinvent the theater, but at the end, the object, it looks like an opera house. No? Now, all the opera house in Europe, in China, in Korea, they are some object that where you can walk through them, you can climb on the roof. So in that sense, I think that it's more interesting also to open the second road, that is this road that walk on the roof and come down, and transforming it also in another kind of theater, no? A theater for the people, for the artists that they play every day in the city.
Thank you. It's a really interesting project, especially because it raises a lot of interesting questions. I think that it is really a project of your generation. In a way, it kind of refuse the idea of a hierarchy and a strict relation between the spectator and the performance. You really want to have something, a new kind of experience that is collective, in a way that reminds to social network, or in the moment all the people can collectively experience a show. And so the question is how, let's say, a virtual understanding of a show can find a physical manifestation. And that's your main question, and you really interesting. You arrive at this idea of opera house, of a physical construct of an object, and in which everything is moving. The people inside are moving, perhaps the actors are moving as well, and there is a part of the building that is moving. And what I thought interesting is that actually your project reminds me to an old project, not that old, but that has a similar but different issues in times where the virtual was still at the beginning, the Moebius house of Ben van Berkel, in which basically, in order to have the people living inside the house following the best light exposure that you can have while doing your activities inside the house, basically he left the program of the house and he created this sort of shape that in a way reminds to your building, the way that people could move inside following the sun movement. And in your way, what you are trying to do is actually how can it be more interactive with the show, but it's the same question of how can interact more with the environment, with the sun, etc. How can I create a physical, of course, it's more complex in the moment you have an object. How can I create a physical object that can expand or augment a collective experience? And I think that this question and the way you basically found your solution is really interesting.
KAIYUN, I just want to compliment you on creating, in a sense, a project that is at once urban and geologic, while it is trying to take a cultural paradigm and transform it. And, you know, there are a couple of things that I think are very promising and could even benefit from further interrogation. I think first, in a sense, you took a very simple idea about the shape of a pyramid having one kind of symbolism, and the inversion of it taking on a different symbolism, and that becoming the, in a sense, the impetus for this Mobius of a form that became topological and geological. And in fact, in this particular view, I like very much the silhouette of your opera house against the silhouette of the mountains that are behind the city. So it seems to me that it is as much in dialogue with that geographic question and geologic question as it is with the cultural paradigm that you are questioning. A couple of things seem interesting is that as you're trying to say that, in a sense, in China, the opera counts on immediate engagement. So much of it is outdoors and has a kind of, in a sense, a different urgency. I would argue that there's a couple more opportunities embedded within the forms that you've created. And one is that as we look outside, while you've created the kind of aspect ratio of the view or the theater of what's happening, in a sense, you situated a place for film, for protests, for urban spectacles that even go beyond the boundaries of what opera means. And I think that gets to the heart of your thesis of what does it mean to actually take a paradigm like opera and make it have new and broader meaning as the audience for traditional opera tends to diminish. In all that, if there was a next chapter for this thesis, because I think the form, the impetus, and the inquiry are extraordinary, if one were to develop it further, it seems that slicing through that section in motion once again might yield greater intersections as opposed to just the ring against the form. Those intersections where they pause might lead to some surprises, like the surprise of your cafe that's sliced along the edge. You know, there are some, in a sense, affordances of the juxtapositions of these forms that I think could occur by chance and by discovery and become, in a sense, new additions to the topography of the city and the cultural life of this urban destination. So I think it's a huge, in a sense, it's a huge accomplishment, which I really applaud you on. And in a sense, look at this issue of the collective, the urban, and spectacle as the impetus to continue to think about all the paradigms that could be introduced and embedded within the paradigm of opera.
So I completely agree with Marion. I have a couple issues with the project. I mean, I think that you've really touched on something. I've done a ton of cultural facility work in my life, including a couple opera houses. And beyond freaking out a little bit about how much this building would actually cost to rotate and all the engineering.
But there's no object in this in thesis.
But I have a little, I think if there was a chapter beyond the chapter Marion asked you to write, it would be a chapter where I would ask you to think about the materiality that you've selected, and does it match the spirit of democracy that you're trying to imbue? I get from the materiality, and there's no seating, there's no grass. There's from the human scale, it looks like something it has a level of intimidation to it. So I think there's a kind of, how can you further democratize the form through materiality and greenery and landscape, like thinking about a little bit further about some of those issues, because it comes across incredibly cold and uninviting to me right now as an object. And But I love this idea of the street that people can be into. That's, reminds me a lot of what was the opera called that was on the High Line that Jill Scafidi or Renfro did? I can't remember what it was called, which was an incredibly successful project and totally changed opera and the way that we thought about opera in the city. And I've done a lot of work with opera companies, and that was a big deal. And so that the fact that there could be a facility that would help opera change and grow through this unique idea is very interesting. But I also, does that street need to be raised, right? Could that street be on the ground where people could interact with it more? I mean, there's some different ways to think about this form that could add a little more, get to your thesis a little bit further is what I would say. So.
Yeah, there's some really interesting things about the project. It dawned on me that you could actually have a set of actors that with the two theaters, you could have a kind of double billing where the actors go into just like a half hour later, you're going to two at once.
Don't you just kind of interesting. Creative people in here to do like cool stuff? They would just go bananas and do the most amazing things with it.
Well, that would pay for the mechanism, right? You'd make the argument that you'd sell that much more tickets. But I think it reminds me of there's a director here in Los Angeles. I think he's going to move to Detroit. Yuval Sharon, who did an opera. Actually, part of it was at SCI-Arc, where he drove around the city, and it was completely interactive and an amazing event. And I think the point was to bring opera out of the box, right, out of a kind of exclusive situation and out into the city. So there's many different ways to do that. And I think at its best, this project's ultimately trying to do that, even with the kind of back of stage opened up, a kind of public space. Although we wouldn't imagine that as a kind of theater space, but breaking it open. And I think those aspirations are really good. I agree with a lot of the other comments about some of the smaller details, the stairs, and does it need to be up, etc. It also reminds me of this Doug Aitken piece at the Hirshhorn in DC, where he projected the entire drum. And I guess I would have been more aggressive with that, like not be just have it in the frame of that cylinder. I would kind of like the amazing thing about that piece was the technology and the seamlessness of it and the kind of hiding of the projections. You didn't know where they were. So from a we've all seen projections on buildings by now many a times, but when you can pull it off where the whole piece does that, it can be quite spectacular. So maybe it would make the ring a little bit more dynamic and a little bit less static. Maybe the inside was a little bit different from the outside. Yeah, those are my comments. I love the little cafe crack with the chairs. I love that part of the video.
Great for installing machine guns.
All right.
What is interesting, if we think about the references that have been made to continuous projects, whether it's Mobius House or some of the other ones that we know have been explored, I think it would have been very interesting also to look at the evolution of opera and theaters. Because if you think about Sharon's Opera House and how revolutionary it was when it came up with the whole vineyard style, one of the first times it took the directional box and made it panoramic and sectional in its disposition. That's where I was, intrigued with maybe a more amplified investigation of the section inside, because that backstage, front stage intersection that's being toyed with by movement in many ways, I think, still has questions about the sectional relationship of the audience, which in a sense is now locked into what I'd say is a very static and predetermined form on the exterior to actually create this kind of topographic transformation. And yet what I think would be really, really interesting to interrogate would be literally that, the typological experiences, because it could be within these three theaters, there could be the hyper-traditional that is made untraditional by that form of movement. And then in a sense, the next chapter of the vineyard theater form taking on something else altogether. And maybe that has some movement at stake. There are theaters that are very compact that have movement that are intrinsic in its function, like the Wiley Theater in Dallas. And there's a case where the audience, the seating, and the stage are all in motion to keep a very tight footprint to have an infinitely arrayed experience. So if Jason's concerned about the price of this particular, in a sense, expression of what theater can be, particularly as a form and as a place of movement, it seems like it would be super interesting to, in a sense, be almost more indexical with the inquiry of how it's transforming the topology of theater and opera.
I think that's an incredible point, and it's a really fascinating project. I think that the idea of looking more carefully at the section is definitely an area that would benefit from further work. I also think the point that Niccolo was bringing up about the, let's say, using other kind of media, but also the flipping of front and back of house that I think Marion's kind of suggesting would be, you know, the total theater if we start with Gropius, and also looking at various experiments from the 20s in theater of being Bertolt Brecht, total theater and so forth, of flipping the audience and the scenography and so forth is all a possibility here, but unless I'm misreading the project, it doesn't seem to do that. But that would be an implicit possibility. And I think what we're seeing right now with everyone going online, the flipping of front and back of house seems to be a really amazing possibility right now. And we're seeing that in fashion. For instance, the recent Gucci and Maison Margiela shows are really amazing at flipping that, you know, taking advantage of the situation to do that. And here one could be doing that in an actual morphological way as well. And I think a lot of the comments have suggested that. So the fact of opening that discourse up, I think, is a really, you know, positive aspect of this thesis.
Yeah, and this also reminds me to another kind of opera house, which is actually the music concerts, you know, where you have the big ones, where you have multiple stage and you have the people actually walking around. Think about Woodstock with all these landscape and supernatural environment. And where was the concert? In one stage, in the other, in between. So I think that also that could be a nice reference on a different direction.
I'd just say this would also be the first opera house in the world that would be able to reopen post-COVID, because you could actually have the walking space and not have to be sitting in the right seats together. And I mean, I think there's some serious issues to talk about with performance spaces and how they will reopen and will they ever be the same. And even if we do get a vaccine, there are some really, really interesting conversations right now happening in those fields about what it means to reopen performance spaces. So I love that you've already created a one type of interesting solution. I think that could be further explored in this project too, given its potential flexibility.
You know, it's funny, in Thesis, sometimes you get a thesis student you've worked with quite a long time while they've been in graduate school. In other cases, like with KAIYUN, we had not worked together at all. And so you end up having some very interesting conversations. I mean, KAIYUN did not have this project at the beginning of the summer, the location of the site. And is from Shenzhen, which is not a city I know well, but I think probably even in your own lifetime, KAIYUN, from when it was sort of, the neighbor was still under British control, and Shenzhen was one of the first cities that had a kind of connection outside of China and was a kind of dirty, gritty manufacturing city where you could have everything made, into a city, as I understand it, that's quite wealthy, quite successful, and always wanting to show its, you know, that it has arrived. It's not look out Beijing, look out Shanghai. Shenzhen is a important cultural city, and so the fact that it's this, you know, a native son making a project to look at Hong Kong, I think was always part of your thinking about it, KAIYUN. So maybe even to go to Jason's question, maybe it is supposed to be slightly intimidating as a kind of show of bravado for, you know, and I think one of the things that KAIYUN realized early on is there is a thing that's like, oh, these other cities have an opera house, we're gonna have an opera house. And no one goes, you know, so it turns out opera is not that popular, you know, in never mind in other countries, but in China as well. And you realize, well, it's not really why it's being built at all. and then somehow interrogating the different types of operas, trying to find a way that it accommodates both traditional Chinese and traditional opera, whether this is the solution or not, to come up with this kind of harebrained device that then potentially not only solves those two things, but opens up to these new forms of theater and performance. Aside from the exterior of it, I always thought that that was a great step to have kind of made with a project like this, and then to think a lot, I'm not, so maybe those little pyramid diagrams are not suggesting spreading out democracy, but that everybody can be authoritarian at some point in their life by climbing to the top of the stairs, and then you come back down and you're so but quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was last summer I visited the Beijing Opera House for the first time, and I would say this project's trying to be the opposite of that. I mean, it's completely isolated. It's in a moat. You enter it by going under the water, and you pop up, and it's obviously there to impress on a certain kind of civic level, the symbol of I'm not sure what progress, culture, etc. in ways that are astonishingly large and impactful. So of course, seeing the project published, but experiencing it was quite something, particularly inside, which is this kind of dome. And then you realize that it contains multiple theaters inside. But it's about as removed from the city as you can be. And so I think in that context, from as a typology, I think this thesis is you didn't reference that, but I would see it as antithetical to that project in a good way.
Yeah, KAIYUN, go for it, John.
No, but then the scale of it's similar, so it's this ginormous thing, so I think Jason said before, if it was on the ground, does that change it? Like, is it more kind of humble in a way? The ring's on the ground and there's theaters grouped around it, and it isn't trying to make a larger civic space. It would be a different kind of project, I realize, but if I follow that train of thought that I'm taking as a kind of anti-object project, maybe you have to rethink maybe some of your impulses as an architect and as a designer, that you want to make public space. You want to kind of do both, and I'm not so sure that's the best approach to the core of what the power of the thesis is, at least from you referenced a kind of political argument that was a little bit unclear, but it could have been translated more into an urban argument in my mind.
Great.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I think I was just going to kind of echo some of that. That it's funny. It's hard. I almost feel like unable to evaluate whether it's too much bravado or not in some ways, because of this discussion of like, what does it mean to, why would Shenzhen want to produce this kind of opera? And what I appreciate though is, KAIYUN, you did put a lot of thought into this idea that it needs to be at the sea and kind of in between, like visible from Hong Kong, but also when you look at the opera from Shenzhen, you'd see Hong Kong in the background. This thing that like in some ways has to operate at a certain kind of scale for it to meet that ambition, I suppose. And I can imagine, in a context that I don't have a lot of familiarity with, that would be something quite important to be able to do. It does bring up questions, about, like at the human scale and how tiny these people are. They're so tiny. But I think that to me that your ambition with the whole thesis is so great, to really think through opera as a kind of architectural performance. Architecture is a performance of, let's say, politics, and then like how culture maybe like intersects those things. And as someone who obviously went to school in a very different culture than where they're from, that's, I'm sure, something that you become much more acutely aware of your own culture and your own background when you go somewhere quite different from your own. And so it's really nice to see you bring that experience back into your work.
Great. David, we'll let that be a final comment. Can I just make a stupid Zoom suggestion? We're trying to figure out whether it's better when they're done talking to share the screen or not, so that we can see each other. But you know, when you have like the little windows on the right when the screen is shared, you know, you can drag that way over, and then the shared screen becomes small and the participant window becomes big. So maybe when they're presenting and they share the screen, you slide that over so you see a lot of the screen. And then you slide it back. That's what I did, so I can see, we can all see each other more. Just a suggestion. We're gonna stop sharing, and then can you stop sharing? Stop sharing. You're oversharing, KAIYUN. Thank you. Hey, we're gonna just take let's see, a 6-minute break, so that everyone can get a coffee and whatever else answers of nature, and then at 10 minutes to. Whatever hour you're at, 10, so that's in 6 minutes, we'll come back and we're gonna have Julia Pike presenting. There's 2 more projects, all right?
Perfect, okay.
Thank you. Maybe just, I don't know, leave everything, I'm gonna leave mine on, but you know.
Yeah.
If I turn this off, everything is gonna be a problem. So I'll turn my screen off for a minute. Thank you, KAIYUN.
Hi, Zago.
Hello, how are you? We'll get everyone.
Is it okay if I go ahead and...
What's that?
Sorry, my internet is being a little bit slow. Is it okay if I go ahead and share my screen?
Yeah, just maybe give us a minute.
One thing, Julia, I would post your link because it was it's chopped off at the end, like where your name is.
Yes.
There's like a space between your name and the thing. But
gotcha.
Yeah.
You may.
Oh, these are two different links.
You may just have to copy the link into.
I did, and it worked, but I had
two different links. Sorry about that.
I had to delete a space between your name and the.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'll repost it.
It's hard to post things so it doesn't all look like one thing in the chat.
Yeah, exactly.
I keep doing like this weird spaces just so people can see it. Okay. Julia Pike, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Pike, and my thesis is called Street Style. The concept of my thesis kind of began from discovering Rainer Banham's Loves Los Angeles. And at the beginning of the semester, I used that opportunity to kind of think about what Rainer Banham would do if he existed in LA now and what his commentary would be. I won't say too much to that. I'm going to be playing my YouTube clip now. It's a small video about my explorations of LA and the different types of ecologies that I discovered. But I also provided a link within the chat. So if my audio cuts out or anything, just go there.
Hey Siri.
Good morning, Julia.
What's the definition of street style?
According to Wikipedia, street style is a comprehensive approach to fashion that is based on individualism, rather than focusing on current fashion trends. Using street style methods, individuals demonstrate their multiple identities, in addition to utilizing subcultures and intersecting styles or trends. Would you like to know more?
Sure.
Downloading street style now.
Wait, what? What's street style?
In early 2020, the city of Los Angeles developed an app called Street Style, which allowed residents of Los Angeles to contribute to future development. Street Style allows anyone to contribute to the urban microecologies. Participants can upload local elements of the city, and through repetition, scale, and deletion, participants can play with local elements on-site. Would you like to play?
This is Los Angeles. And this is me. My name is Julia Pike, and I'm a graduate student of SCI-Arc. For the past 2 years, Los Angeles has fascinated me with its multiple identities and its ability to change. Since downloading the app, I've been driving around and discovering these sites of digital archipelagos, and these are some of my favorite I've found.
Destination is on the right. You have now arrived at Poolside. Would you like to enter?
Yes. Poolside is one of my favorite discovered ecologies. Here on the east side of LA, in Boyle Heights, Poolside celebrates the indoor-outdoor qualities of Los Angeles. Emphasizing year-round amazing weather, the forms are playful but purposeful, and the assets reinvent and upcycle fun forms and vegetation found throughout the area. When people think of LA, they typically think of traffic. Driving around LA is seen as reading Los Angeles in its original form. This next microecology celebrates the overlooked aspects of LA, gathering its forms through pieces of recognizable infrastructure. Industrial exhibits the temporal qualities of LA's architecture. The assets are either exhibiting a sense of permanence through forms of necessity like highways and parking structures, or its adaptability through pieces of architectural impermanence like billboards or signs. Our last stop of the day is one of the more humorous archipelagos I've found, gathering pieces of iconic architecture throughout the city.
You have now arrived at Showstopper. Would you like to enter?
Yes. Showstopper recombines pieces of iconic architecture and gives participants unique animated assets that highlight various pieces of design found throughout the city. And when I mean highlight, I mean really highlight.
Sorry if the audio didn't match up with the video as well, but I hope that the YouTube video gave you kind of the description of what I was looking for. Moving forward, I kind of wanted to examine how this AR app would actually be put into use. So I invite all the jury members and anyone who has the link to log on to juliapike.com. And there you'll find an asset called Poolside Game on my desktop. And if you start in the game, you can kind of navigate using the normal arrows, and the mouse itself is how you direct your view. And along with that and how the assets come into play, if you click 1, 2, or 3, 1 provides the scene with a dingbat form that Rainer Banham kind of famously made popular in his 4 ecologies. 2 brings up palm trees, which are famous for Los Angeles's skyline. And 3 is, sorry about that. And 3 is pools that kind of allow and contribute to this micro oasis. If you left click on any of the provided assets, you can delete yours or other players' assets that they put into the game. That way it starts to kind of build a multiplayer game where multiple people can contribute to each one of these scenes. I hope you have fun. And I know there's probably a lot of questions that kind of go off of this. So I'm excited to answer any questions you might have.
I'll just dive into the quick one, Julia. I really thought it was delightful, and obviously Rainer Banham was British originally and was indeed a professor at UCL, where I am at present. My question really is, I love the sort of spirited way this app works, and with the forms of trees, in a way, there's sort of the wit of it in the most positive sense. But I kind of wonder what the rules of engagement are, the terms of engagement, and whether you could take pool and sort of push the water problem, whether you can take palm tree and push the ecological crisis problem, whether you can take built form and talk about low cost robotic building in some way. I'm just wondering what the political angles that could come through this through game.
That's actually a really great point. I started this because I was so bothered by the continual empty lots scattered throughout the city, and wanted to kind of imagine what more could happen. And particularly maybe without even building anything. I think that we live in an era where most people have access to smartphones. I researched a study that in 2015 that talked about how homeless people have 86% of homeless people actually have cell phones, and of that 86%, 75% of them have smartphones. And the city of LA, in my opinion, isn't really taking full advantage of these public lands that are sitting empty. So I kind of wanted to hypothesize about how people could start contributing to these narratives. The idea of just these particular ecologies are just my speculations on how Rainer Banham himself would have continued from Autotopia to Surftopia to the plains of Id. So poolside, industrial, and showstopper are kind of just my 20th century continuations of that, not so much a political stance on what particularly should be in these sites. But I also think that there's a advantage when people just assume that a poor neighborhood needs X, Y, Z without giving people the capability to have their own input and own collaboration. So I'm kind of just speculating on how that could continue.
Thanks.
So I'm not sure if you've heard of, and it's troubled language, and I admit it because I'm partially responsible for it, of the movement that happened in America called creative placemaking. So there's a great deal of work done around, what is the role of creative people in response to the housing crisis, that the last recession, right? And there was a very large amount of work done around how community voice is important in the creative process, especially around that. So I really enjoy the number one, like, you hit all my happy spots. Like, it's a great project. It's really cool. It's fun. It has joy, which we need right now, color, which I love. There's a really interesting organization based in LA, partially in LA and partially in Nairobi, called Konkui Design Initiative, which has done a great deal of work on, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, a great deal of work on lots in the urban form that you're trying to solve the problem around. So a lot of their process stuff would probably be very interesting to you. I'm happy to introduce you to them. There were projects in Long Beach that were funded by the National Endowment for the Arts about creating different, creating temporary structures on lots to have performances. And this kind of gets back to the idea of breaking down the idea of the Opera House. It was like, let's bring the performance to the community, right? So there's a ton of work out there. I'd urge you to look at some of the stuff that an organization called Art Place America has released. They will sunset this year, probably, maybe will go on, but they have huge amounts of information that relate to, I think, your interests. So I'm also happy if you want to get in touch with me to talk to you more and more about this. But I think I've never seen anything quite like your idea of kind of gamifying urban objects. So I'm really, really intrigued about how that fits into it's basically my area of practice. So I'm really thrilled by this, and congratulations.
Thank you. And yeah, I would love to know any future context for a recent grad is always welcomed. So thank you.
I'll drop some things in there.
Congratulations, Julia. I think what I really appreciated is that there's a there's always an arm's length characteristic about everybody's approach to doing art. And
would you like to know more?
What I loved is making it as much a self-portrait as it was a kind of urban adventure. And what it makes me think a little bit about, and I think Jason was talking about certain periods of times and movements. In the mid 80s, the Architectural League was despairing about how little good work was being done relative to the question of housing, particularly affordable housing. And so there was an exhibition, I believe it was in 1987 or 1989, called Vacant Lots. And it invited a whole host of architects and recent graduates to think about what they might do about this particular question, vacant lots. And to some extent, what you have tapped into is what I would call the open-ended, non-urban urbanity of Los Angeles, and added a kit of parts that, in many ways, would still be an objectification game of silhouette against that open field. And it would be really interesting to think about chapter 2. And the chapter 2 might be what happens if indeed density and population demands could ask your asset to do more, both vertically, laterally, and in its capacity to actually be within compressed spaces. So your beautiful little drive, through these open roads and these fields that are strewn might actually then start to get into slivers of spaces that are left over between party walls. And then arguably that could then be another chapter there, though, of what we'd call sleeving this adventure into a hyperdense configuration. So I think what is so beautiful about what you've done is you've created something quintessentially LA, which is the film and self-portrait with a soundtrack and a color space that is, in a sense, delightful yet insidiously sinister, because it's speaking to the vacancy, if you will, of pure speculation that is in fact creative. So I would say congratulations, and I would also say hang on to it in the second, third, and fourth chapters to see if, as Barbara was saying, could it have a cultural question that it's answering? Could it have an urban density question that it's answering? And can it in fact have a projective, rather than, in a sense, delightful speculative prompt? Can it actually have a tougher political agenda?
Thank you. Yeah, for my thesis prep work, I actually got in touch with the Free Lots of Los Angeles that builds community gardens on free lots. But then COVID kind of happened. So a lot of things have taken different directions, but in an actually delightful continuation of the project.
Yeah, I agree with some of the comments, and I think great project, Julia. A few things that come up that are illuminating to me. About 20 years ago, we did a small project in Boyle Heights that was for a Boys and Girls Club, and it had an existing pool. And as oftentimes when you're practicing and you have to help your clients raise money, we redesigned it, and then we did some research on pools per household in Los Angeles, right? So pools per household. So the Bantam example maybe would be almost, well, as I'm a kind of transplanted Angelino, but I've been here 33 years, so I can call myself an Angelino now. We sometimes are sensitive to that outside view of what, Los Angeles is, palm trees and pools and things like that. But the research we did, we took a spot of Beverly Hills, West Covina, which is a suburban area, and then Boyle Heights, where the project was. And we quickly found out that, as you'd imagine, in Beverly Hills, it's one pool per 3, plots of land. You just see pool, 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 pool. West Covina, it's about 1 to 6. And Boyle Heights, it turned out it was 1 per 10,000, right? So there are aspects to that, just even that, things like pools and access to it. And I think today more and more we're examining that and self-examining it. And I really liked your research and your knowledge about the homeless and the empty lots. So this makes me think, that this has potential. I loved the showstopper, just for I just thought, well, we don't have to build those buildings anymore. We can just, enjoy them, virtually, and that'd be fine. So that's one thing. And then lastly, two more things. Getting outside during COVID, the fact just seeing you drive through the city was really awesome. Like being out and not, I'm so used to only seeing students with their backgrounds or their closet behind them. So I was just like, oh, she was outside. That's great. So I really enjoyed that. You just like broke us out, of our boxes literally by doing the film. And then I thought I had something else, but I've forgotten it now. But thanks. It was a really enjoyable journey you took us on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for showing us your project. Is really, really interesting. I really love it. And I love the playfulness, the colors, the game sort of approach, the interaction and so on. And I'm also really envious because I'm more a dark person, so I wouldn't probably be able to handle and make great composition with all these joyfulness. But I really love the project. It's like, when Venturi arrived to Las Vegas, he wrote his famous book, but he was writing again in complexity and contradiction. I loved and I find it interesting also the effect of communication and the thing that you use actually the arc shape for the habitation, the square for the industrial shapes, the curve for the shops. I wonder how this element would be in Italy, in UK, in China, in Japan, in India, and so on. And also wonder if you could at a certain point think about taking out instead of adding element, there is a building that I don't love, I take it out and I see what is behind it. But that's a minor thing. What I really, really loved and enjoy about your project is the presentation. And I really wanted to congratulate with you, but also with your advisor, because I think it is my impression that there is this big effort at SCI-Arc to transform, reinvent, deconstruct the way you present the project. And in the moment you change that, you are actually changing architecture. Because architecture is about communication, it's about the communication of an idea, it's about the communication of a project. And we go back to the Venturi discourse. So the presentation is a project itself, like the project that you are actually presenting. And your presentation as well as your project are really, really strong, new, fresh. And so thank you very much for that. I really love it. It's really Los Angeles. It's really Californian in a way for the colors, but it could be adapted and transformed in so many interesting ways all around the world.
Thank you. Yeah, I also have been thinking about the taking away aspects and. 2 years ago, there was a thesis called Games of Deletion that also was sort of a starting point for this thesis, where they kind of hypothesized just that about architecture kind of be taking away. And that's why the deletion part of the game is also sort of important to me. There's this balance between, it's almost a conversation of architecture at that point where you're also allowing people to have their input, but also allow people to take it away, that I found really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's these are fantastic comments. What a wonderful jury we have here. I think that the point about the interface, that architecture as interface, I think Banham kind of sets that up. And also the idea, maybe also speaking back to our London friends, of Cedric Price, of potentially, thinking about architecture as not necessarily a built thing that doesn't have to be a building, but could be an experience. So I think there's a number of, let's say, disciplinary things being engaged here, but I really appreciate all the comments that point towards also the potential for a professional direction, another form of practice, another model of practice, which is so urgent today for our students coming through school at this point. And I have to say, I've just so much enjoyed working with Julia, because she's really pushed herself into a whole new set of possibilities for herself and a way of thinking about things and new skills. I mean, honestly, this whole interface thing is not something that she came into Thesis already working on. So she's developed a lot of different, I think, techniques, but those techniques are always related to a bigger set of values and aesthetic ones, but also cultural values. And I thought the points that Niccolo brought up also, that this could apply to a different kind of cultural context, and I think is really fascinating.
I think that's an interesting point about representation and the potentials of the project. I think get me excited as a practitioner as well. The idea that, you know, how architects present to the public, engage communities, is a challenging endeavor, and in a city like Los Angeles, extremely difficult. It's one of the things I think people outside the city sometimes imagine, oh, anything goes there, it must be so easy, as opposed to the city I'm in, and it's anything but. It's incredibly difficult to get traction behind certainly big or public projects, but even small ones. And the idea that, you know, I remember my former mentor, Werner Seligman, used to always say, oh, when you present a public project, never show elevations, just plans. Because the idea being that that they would start changing things, you know. So there was like hiding things was a method in the old days, you know, and you kind of held the keys to knowing what it was. This has all been blown out now. So things are very literal and almost realistically presented, and you can't get around it. And what it seems that it would go is we'd literally gather around a site in a community meeting with our phones and look at it. There's no, we don't control that representation. And then even further, opening it up, and this is terrifying to me as maybe a typical architect, the idea of making it a game and everyone participates and like blowing it all up, and the community starts voting in real time and moving your stuff around. And I mean, I see these potentials as terrifying, but also exciting, and also potentials. And so I think the project is broad enough. This is what I like about it, that someone like me who just described something very narrow and maybe professionally based, that you've created something that has a spectrum that many of us could take, and Peter might take it more philosophically another way and be more about gaming and be happy with that study of representation. But then I too can take it and say I'd like Garcetti to employ this technology for zoning envelopes so that we can just see them instead of having arcane diagrams that are written down in some book, which is just about 1,000 years, you know, behind. You know, why don't we have a dynamic city 3D model that is like in this environment that we can all participate on, that's smart and set? And there actually are things in the LA City building code that are trying to modernize and do such things. They're not quite there, but this is definitely where it's going.
I'll just sorry, just briefly add to what John and Peter just said. The Cedric Price reference is a really good one, because I think for this to be sort of prototypical, Julia, I think it's really interesting, and not, as has been said, not necessarily built, or maybe even less is there, or maybe there's a joker in the pack that there's a found object, or
yeah,
somebody could put in, because I think to the danger we have, what we need to protect ourselves from, perhaps as architects, is our preconceptions and assumptions. And therefore, if the game can somehow jump something, so we think less linearly, and more, and they're able to embrace something that maybe through language, even the way you name things or don't name things or leave gaps for names, could allow other ways of entering, other players to enter your game.
I think that's incredibly wise. And I just want to say something about your spirit, which I don't ever want you to lose. So public projects are, this kind of work is really hard, right? You have a joy and a curiosity that's coming through here that you just had to remind yourself when it gets into when you really get into some of this work and how hard it's going to get. You are trained, you do have an expertise you can bring into those public conversations, but don't lose the kind of joy and playfulness. And this is advice for your career, right? Like something I had to tell myself, like, you know, we don't work in the nuclear program here, people. It's supposed to be sort of fun and interesting, you know? So it's coming through. Maybe it's a spirit or an aura or something about your work that I just want you to, don't ever lose, you know? When you're in those hard moments, remember that is something that's there in your work, and it's really highly needed right now in this kind of public engaged work. There's 1,000 names for it: community engaged design, public services. I mean, there's a million of these. You can research forever. I have 1,000 books for you, but you know, it works best when there's joy, care, and love put into it. And I think you see that in the work of folks like R&R Studio or things like that, where yes, it adapts to the place, but it brings a spirit that is always there. So anyways, I'll say that.
Is there a specific reason why you decide not to put like human beings inside animals, or, you know, I just want to add the best friend there or something like this, you know?
We actually previously talked about it, and I took a digital avatar of myself kind of moving through the scene. But I think the abstraction helps to keep the focus on the actual lot itself. But animals would be fun. I'll have to add those to my asset list.
I maybe have a few just clarification questions for myself as I'm kind of trying to understand the whole scope. The film presents the sense that this is like a thing that exists that you're discovering, and then it kind of shifts into a different tone where you're actually presenting it. And so you're both playing a character which is like discovering something and then being the one that kind of explains it. And then the website is a kind of space for everyone to interact with something. And so I'm a little bit curious. Like, I feel like I don't want to make assumptions about who the audience for the project is. And I'm not entirely sure if it is a disciplinary one or if it is like the city or community members, but it seems like I think it's trying to connect to all three audiences, I suppose, but I'm trying to figure out like whether the game is really there as a way for people in the community to really reimagine new possibilities for their environment, or whether it's there as a model for other architects and planners to think of ideas for how to do that. Because it seems in some ways it's pretty interesting, but it also seems to only, to sort of have a lot of like, let's say, guardrails as to what's possible, let's say, in that game space. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, where you see the audience and which parts of the thesis, whether they have different audiences or if it's like more of like one overall kind of group that you're sort of aiming to speak to.
Sorry, I think you cut out at the end there for me, but I kind of think I understand what you're asking. And
Okay.
What I kind of imagined when starting to build this was following Rainer Banham's philosophy of kind of using beta car and theory as like a tour through Los Angeles, And in that way, it was personal to me. But I had to really kind of focus on the communities and neighborhoods themselves. And kind of the continuation of the game is just to start to talk to what these locations could potentially have and potentially start to do. But I think mostly I'm talking to the community. Architects, I think like it doesn't have to be one or the other, I guess is what I'm trying to sort of articulate poorly, but that these lots are for people that live within the local realm. It's for them, and the continuation and design of it are the people that interact with these spaces on a semi-daily basis. And you could be like me and explore and curate these different environments and drive around Los Angeles. But in my mind, this app that LA is developing would be mainly used by people who walk past these places every day.
Julia, I really like your project. I like your project for this idea also of reinvention, as Niccolo say, of the way of looking at the city of Bynum. No? But Bynum was, for example, influenced a lot by Ed Ruscha, no? the artist. In a way, he selects the car as a tools to look at the city, as Ed Ruscha did with the photography. No? And my question is about why you select, of course, you use the new technology to look at the city. No? So you have different options. You have the option of the social network, for example, and trying to open a relationship with the social network, with the community, and look to the city through the image or the game as you create. No? So why you select the game? Because for me, it's very important to understand this. No, I have an idea in my mind, but I really want to know why you select the game and not another, a virtual reality, just the phone, the social network.
Yeah, I think the game and it kind of democratizes it, and I don't want to put assumptions onto that, but the game as compared to like virtual reality or these other types of spectrums that you're talking to opens up a new playing field. So I was really interested in kind of talking to that realm.
Okay.
Kind of a dumb question, but first off, great. Thank you for the presentation. That was really very well done. I had a little, just maybe it's the style of the video, but you're walking around and you see these projects sort of on your phone. Then is the idea then that's done, that the projects exist like that, or oh, look what they're about to build here? Which of those two?
No, it's kind of a precursor to development is kind of what my thought process was, so that if look at these coagulations of form and archipelagos of design, and then kind of continue to push for development. So sites that don't really get interact with would kind of go by the leeway, but then sites that have a lot of interaction and kind of game elements would be pushed for development.
And I'm going to be.
Is sort of what I
think I understand that. And I just want to make sure I don't play those Pokemon games, but the Pokemon never actually shows up, as I understand it. Is that right? The game is satisfactory just to collect eggs. I don't know what you do with those. So, so that's it, right? It's not that if we look at it hard enough and wish that it'll turn into a real Pokemon. So I'm assuming, so that was, I was wondering, what you're saying is not that these could work at that level where you could just go around and see it, But there's 3 stages. It's an empty lot. It's a lot with a virtual development. And then in some cases, it becomes an actual development. Is that right?
Yeah, that's more that's more the direction of my thesis. And in that way, it kind of allows people to get creative and imagine things in the virtual realm that aren't essentially possible in a physical realm, but that could lead to further developments that are more creative and fun.
Sure, yeah, because it seems like without that last part, you're also like putting up mirages in Boyle Heights, and it's like, wait, there's a pool there, I swear.
I think that they would be actually interesting because it's within the game, you don't have gravity, you don't have cost, you don't have a lot of rules, and actually you may have an overlapping of reality with all the constraints, and actually some kind of building that are not constraint related. And this mixed reality, I think it could be also a nice direction to explore.
It's interesting. I think yesterday, Peter, it came up a couple times back and forth, the notion between a reality, a game, the physical, the digital. And it occurs to me, I was thinking of the movie Tron, where you're trapped in a video game, and maybe
the original or the remake? Just so we can be clear.
Both. No, the original for sure. But this is our existence. We are trapped literally here. We've been experiencing for now 2-3 hours. We're doing our best and having a great, these conversations have been fine, but we're literally trapped. So it's interesting for me to see so many students interested and gravitating towards that. It kind of makes sense. It makes sense to be using that medium as a way to figure stuff out. But I like Andy's question, and it's my question too always, which is, does it stop there or does it have potential further? I mean, I can say that it does, but we're always curious about the author and Julia if she believes that it could, and I hope you do.
Well, Julia, one of the things that reminds me of is having thought I was going to be a concert pianist before I thought I was going to be an architect. There would be this moment where we would sight read a whole piece. It might even be a whole half-hour piece, and it'd be clumsy, but you acquire a sense of where the piece was going just by sort of mapping the whole thing out. And then you figure out the part that you love, and you practice it way too much and neglect everything else. And then you return for your title and fit everything else in desperately to get it right. And in a sense, I could get a sense with your presentation where you fell in love with what you were doing and where you were kind of piecing it all together to deliver the tripartite story or narrative. And to me, it's really interesting because at the end of the day, we want to be right in the heart of the thing that captures our imagination the most and see how far we crack that open and get the intensity in there. And Jim Sterling's last year of teaching was my last year in school. And he was getting pretty bored with teaching, more into the architecture, less into the teaching. And his question for everybody, and he would tend to kind of have 13 students and maybe talk to 1 or 2 a day because he was not super interested at that time of in-depth crit. He would look at you after you'd explain what you were doing and say, why? And you realize that why was a debilitating question as a student, but it was a great question. And in ways, it would be intriguing to say with the invention that you have taken on, which is both joyous and engaging, the why of it, I think, would be a powerful one because it allows and invites in the innocent and the inexperienced into the world of architecture. And it allows them to join that projective future that you might be trying to map out. So the why is very powerful as a way of both presenting and engaging and inviting people into the speculative world that you're seeing. So I would say the why is a very powerful why that you've touched on. And it would be really interesting to continue to intensify the parts that give you joy as a methodology of having a very alternative way of addressing how we communicate what architecture's value is and what it can be.
Fantastic. We're going to let, on those very terrific words, we're going to let them be the last words. And now we are going to, thank you very much, Julian. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations, Julia. Fantastic
Thank you,
work.
everyone.
Wonderful.
Maybe I can stop sharing. Yeah, there we go. Ozan, how are you? Nice to see you.
Hey, everyone. I'm fine. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. Thanks for asking. Just fine.
So I'm going to present my video in the, so I'm going to make my presentation in the video format. And I'm putting the...
I'm sorry, just 1 second, Ozan. So this is, everyone, this is the last presentation for today. And we can have a couple minutes at the end, just maybe students can come back on and we can give them a, take it away, Ozan.
So I put my video on the chat in case it's lagging or if there's any problem. And I'm going to stream it myself also here. Okay. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay. And let me know if you cannot hear it.
This thesis explores methods of estrangement as a means of intervening on historic buildings through their individual elements, formal and spatial potentials. By appropriating elements of historic buildings, a series of manipulations then ensue, including distorting, rescaling, removing, and shifting. The case study selected for testing this thesis is the Bradbury Building in downtown Los Angeles, and the investigation focuses on the two most renowned parts, which are the facade and the ornate atrium. The speculative estrangement takes the shape of an addition to the existing building that wraps around its perimeter from 3rd Street to the Broadway Street. The project then operates on two different scales, the urban scale through the facade and an interior scale through the courtyard and the details of the interior. Every facade on the Bradbury Building focuses on challenging the inherent hierarchies on the existing facades of the Bradbury and carefully investigates ornaments and details that make up this traditional order. By doing so, it highlights elements that are formally rich, however overlooked since they are small in size and repeated in large numbers. So their individual character fades into the overall facade composition. In the facades of the proposed addition, the manipulation starts with subtle rotations of the parts that are previously vertical, such as gates and arch windows. And the estrangement goes on with enlarging and relocating of conventionally small and repeated ornaments. By doing so, historic meanings of these elements are eroded and they become isolated in their formal qualities. Therefore, while moving around the building, the level of estrangement gradually inclines from elements being slightly off to really off. Every atrium in the Bradbury Building focuses on the ornate atrium space of the existing building as an isolated entity from the rest of the Bradbury. As in the facade study, it looks closely at the formal qualities of its interior details that are repeated to make up the overall composition. The first proposed atrium is located on the west side of the building. The program of the original building is retail on the ground floor and office space on the upper floors. The existing atrium is designed in a way that every floor is clearly separated from one another and subsequent ornamentation is repeated in each of them. And finally, it is capped with a steel and glass skylight structure. Similarly, the program of the addition is office space for all of its floors. The new atrium is hung on steel structure so that it can be seen as a single estranged object. It contains elements that belong to either atrium or facade of the original building, such as facade ornaments or railing details. However, used in different configurations in relation to the surrounding floors that wraps around its perimeter. The overall geometry of the proposed atrium is designed through distortions and multiplication of the existing steel skylight structure, which then defines the floor heights of the corridors wrapping around it. Through estrangement of these objects, there is now an intensified architectural encounter with elements that belong to the original building. They are stolen from the Bradbury and reappropriated in a way that their formal qualities are revealed in the social space of the proposed addition. Second proposed atrium is located on the southeast side of the original building. Similarly, it has enlarged detail that belongs to the Bradbury building that are reappropriated here. The overall geometry this time is a denser multiplication of the steel skylight structure that results in diversity in the section of the atrium. This proposed way of estrangement in dealing with historic buildings complies with neither traditions of renovation nor the codes of the building department. However, it offers new ways for interventions that intensifies architectural components of these buildings and liberates them of their historic associations.
Okay. Oh. We'll put in the background. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for showing.
I'm trying to.
Wait, can you orient me again on that? Are there really those blank spots around the Bradbury building? How come I've never noticed them?
You mean the floors? So it focuses on the
two pieces
facade.
that you just filled in just there.
Oh yeah. So those are my additions.
I know, but what's there now?
Oh, there's like a little one-story building in each of them, I think. Yeah.
It's not like an alley or something that you've filled in.
No, it's a one-story building in both sides.
I know I don't answer lie if this is a bad question. Will your new facades be touching the facade of another building?
No, there's an alley between the
okay.
building and this one.
Well, okay. Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Okay, so I start since really nice project. It's really sophisticated, really intellectual, theoretically coherent, interesting at so many levels. For those who are interested in object-oriented ontology, it has a lot of meaning. So I really enjoyed the project. Also, I love the title, since one of my favorite movies is Still in Beauty, an old movie with Liv Tyler. You should watch it because it has references in a way. And so my question is that why you choose specifically certain elements to manipulate? Why you you choose some ornaments, some facade elements instead of, I don't know, taking a chunk of the building and starting rotating with it. So how you basically, since it is a really sophisticated, intellectually sophisticated project, in which way you drove your choices while manipulating. And the other thing is it concerns the materiality. In the moment you create this estrangement, so you take some element from the facade, from some ornamental element, and you actually create a sort of museum where you actually engage with those elements in a new and different way, because you change the scale, because you extruded, etc. I was wondering if you were thinking also to change the materials of these elements or not.
So the first question, I chose them because in my opinion, they're like formally interesting. And since they're so small and high up in the building, people overlook them. So, and they're repeated in large numbers, so they kind of lose their own individual character on the existing building. So that's why I chose them, and chose them individually, not in a repeated way. So that's why, and I agree with, it becomes kind of like a showcase in my atriums, that they're larger. So it becomes bigger, so they create associations to the existing building. That was my reasoning about it.
Concerning the material, I was wondering if you were thinking about changing the materials of those elements, the colors and so on, or just kept as they are originally.
It is changed. In the atriums, it is like everything is like silver, steel color.
Yes.
But on the facade, they have their own like orangish kind of stone color. So it is changed according to the aesthetics of the new atriums.
You know, Ozan, this is a remarkable project, and I have led a series of studios on precedents and actually having a kind of question of what it means to understand a precedent through transformation. And in a sense, you've taken this question transformation to a level of material and spatial specificity that's in some ways incredibly subtle, so much so that for a moment we might mistake that which was original and that which is new, as if we're seeing it and we just had a little too much to drink, at least for the first glance, before we get to check that in fact it's all new. A couple of things though crossed my mind in the seriousness of it all. I was thinking about the very beginnings of postmodernism and the exuberance of people like Michael Graves with the Banasref edition to the House in New Jersey, where it was all about these forms, silhouettes that were historically derived and colorfully colored, and then placed in silhouette to be dislodged from their traditional associations. And to extent you could say that we're revisiting this moment of postmodernism now, and your particular deconstruction and reconstruction of the Bradbury building is at the heart of that particular oeuvre that we're in the thick of right now. Yet there's something that you're beginning to take on that I would say that if you could intensify that and withdraw some other elements, there's something even more powerful than what is here exactly in your atriums. And that is that the bird cage of your atrium that's dropped and rotating, and one of the parts of this animation that was so spectacular, in a sense, was to some extent diminished in its impact and originality by the upside down cornice that had been extracted and enlarged. You can see it right there. And in some ways becomes less sophisticated by the enlargement and displacement of that detail there than some of the other elements like the bird cage itself and the staircase, which have taken the notion of, in a sense, the texture of the railings and turned them into something quite spatial rather than just objectified. And so it seems that the intensity of that thesis on the interior, if it took the grisile, if you will, of this wrought iron cage and really pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed that, and then took the kind of masonry gravity-bound distortion of the perimeter on the exterior and pushed and pushed and pushed that, that then there might be just moments where they come together as opposed to moments where you in fact create the stage set, which can never truly, in a sense, deliver quite the intensity of the other elements. So it's just a question because it's quite sophisticated. And yet in the why of what it might do and what it could really offer, it seems that the very postmodern aspect that has, in a sense, catapulted the project could be jettisoned for something of even greater intensity.
Yeah, I'd quite like to pick up on Marion's point though, because I was sort of also wondering about the project. I really enjoy it in many, many ways, but it kind of, I kind of want to push you further, Ozan. I think that there's a question for me about the object, which is a little bit what we touched on with the opera project, which is the question of monumentality. And somehow these atriums have become object pieces and quite willful, wonderfully imaginative and inventive, but quite willful. And I'm just wondering whether there are other ways to do what you're talking about that are quieter, but perhaps even more profound. So for example, and this is not an answer, but in the Royal Academy building here in London, some years ago now, Norman Foster made an alteration to two staircases where he took the public up to the top and the exterior of the building and made it interior. So actually one was right up against the detail of the pediment of part of the historic building. And it meant that you were very close to something you normally only saw from the street or from very low down. And that kind of changed one relationship to the object itself, to the existing object. So that was kind of quite interesting. And then I suppose there's the Amin Taha work in London, which you may have seen, where it's about misremembering historic facades. And that's super interesting. So the sort of scanning of that and the sort of casting of terracotta concrete to replicate parts of the building and then replacing them. So for me in your project, the most exciting part of it is actually what you're doing with the facade. And that's where I would put my money in what others have called in previous projects, chapters 2 and 3. I think the facade and the subtlety and the alterations of that and the repair of that and the misremembering and the re-remembering and the putting in that what was never there is a fascinating idea. It's a bit like the party wall survey that you must do because as soon as you start tampering it, people see things that they've never noticed before. So I think it's a really great project and push it hard. Do less, but do more. That's what I would go for.
Yeah, I think all the comments have been really spot on. And before I also urge you to push a little further, I just want to say I'm absolutely bananas about your staircase. As much as I was criticizing staircases before, those are gorgeous staircases in those atriums. I am crazy about them. I'm really interested in the idea of pushing the politics of it a little further. And so where did these ornaments come from? What is LA now? What was colonial about this ornamentation? Are there ways to create reparations for some of the wrongs of our country through a challenging of the ornamentation? And that could be materiality, right? I think Niccolo was really accurate about the idea that some of the facade materiality could, in a very subtle way, challenge the colonial aspect of some of the ornamentation. And I think there's other ways to play with it too. Playing with just that ornamentation, you're somewhat limited. So I do think it needs to come through materiality or other ways that you're challenging the arrangement, right? But it's how wonderful through the idea of subtlety to challenge some of these ideas, these architectural ideas on such an iconic building. I mean, it's brave, right? I really dig it. But I just agree with everyone and I urge you to think go a little bit deeper on where they came from and push them a little further. Because I do also agree with Marion that if you don't do that, you could just be, with some of it, it could just be like people going, oh, Michael Graves again, you know? So, and you don't want that because I think you've thought more about it than that. So, but it's really cool. And those staircases, man, Those are gorgeously rendered. That is a beautiful staircase.
Ozan, is there a Rouchet element in your naming of like every facade?
Yeah, it is reference to Ed this thing. It's reference to Ed Rouchet's
every address on Sunset.
Yeah,
hey,
exactly.
Couple of questions of great, really great work. So the Bradbury is a very, very specific building, right? This would not have, you wouldn't say, and I decided I'm going to do this and taking minor effects and ornamentation in a building and magnifying it. I decided to do with a building in LA. I picked the Bradbury because it's funny. I remember first time I was in it when I first came to LA many years ago, and you know, there's not. It's not an architecturally loaded city, especially when you get to kind of pre-war stuff, kind of period pieces of this and that. And you walk into there and you say, oh my God, and it was an engineer, was maybe not an architect who designed it. And so and I think the main thing is you notice it on the outside, fair enough. But when you go inside, it's this world that you just can't imagine was actually there. And I think I did notice it just now in passing. It isn't just that skylight, but it's the columns and then also that elevator, that kind of cage elevator, that there is this kind of filigree to the inside and atmosphere to the inside that's extremely striking. And so I thought part of it had to do with, and when you talk about the exterior, and the atrium, it seems like it seems like these are two different projects. You know, one is a facade project and it becomes maybe a little discursive, you know, commentary, a little mannerist, this turns sideways, this gets bigger, etc. But then on the inside, the translation is different. It's to take this feeling of a near complete filigree and saying, I'm going to just turn it into one. You know what I mean? So the new parts of the building work like the old part in that they're big solid stuff on the street in different orientations and things, fair enough, but they do that. The atriums kind of release this amazing atmosphere of the interior and turns them into these things. So maybe I was thinking it has to do with what's the volume. The outside, I think there's a suggestion that it needs to be louder or quieter, and maybe that's fair. The inside, I think it should be, I don't know. It seems like the part that kills me is when those floors intersect the atrium. You know, like when you ever try to grow an avocado tree in a glass of water with some toothpicks? Perhaps you've never done that.
No, I've never done
like this. When I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, wow, it would be wild to walk in there. And then suddenly there is just this thing. And then inside of it, the staircase are these weird pieces, almost like these, like it's exotic animals in a zoo. And interesting. So there's a kind of, I guess you could imagine, I think it has it, and I think you could be more explicit about it. There is a specific Bradbury diagram at work here, not just, you know, I did this and I did that. I mean, you know this is Tom Anderson, this guy did this Los Angeles Plays Itself. I don't know if you know that. It's this great rambling thing about all the times that Los Angeles has shown up in movies. And there's like an entire chapter just on the Bradbury building. I mean, it's shown up in dozens and dozens of movies, almost always the interior. And it has since, I think, the 20s or 30s. So, you know, so I think, and even with your nod to the Rouchet and the kind of LA, you know, yours is kind of in the category of Los Angeles Plays Itself. And you know, you could have it, you could own more Los Angeles in this.
Mm-hmm.
I think I probably fall somewhere in the similar comments as some of the previous ones where I really like the facade, but it seems like the moments where it's really obvious, like the really large rotated arch or something, it seems, or the other part where there's like the, I don't know, this kind of crenellated L area. Yeah, well, there's that arch, but like later on, like this part of the bottom right, where it's like overly large, it's sort of like the facade is somewhere between a kind of very subtle modernist like contemporary modernist kind of redo, and then this kind of mannerist moment where certain things have been like overly enlarged. Like Giulio Romano like came up and like put the giant keystone in the wrong place or something like this, and it's sort of going in between the two. And it to me it's more interesting like moments right there where the top of that emergency staircase like receives this kind of copy of something from somewhere else without it being necessarily like overly wrong. Like there's these kind of just strange moments where you, if you're really looking at it, there's like things that just don't quite make sense. But then this stuff that's like really obvious seems to kind of call attention to itself in a very different kind of way. That what I like about the project in the rest of it is it's like moments like this where the original building and the new one, it's almost hard to tell at first which one's which, or that there's this sense that things are kind of very carefully placed. I don't know. That's the part where I'm a little bit unsure of like the necessity of like of whether it could have just been an arch that's big, whether it needed to also be rotated, for example. With the interior, I love the birdcage atrium. I think that the strange objects that are kind of floating and their rescaling probably makes maybe more sense in their case. But I think that there's something about those floor plates which are a little bit strange. But I like the duplication of the project. I think it's a very strange thing to do, like to sort of add just a little bit, and yet make sure you still get an atrium in each new part. Wouldn't be the first thing one would think is like make a whole addition, but make sure like 70% of it is just atrium when you already have like a giant atrium in the main building. I like that excess of it, but I think there's something between like having excess or being excessive and then like overly playing up that excess with like little things that kind of make it seem over the top already, that maybe there's a kind of refinement of that would be pretty interesting. But I don't know. I like the ambition to just do just a little, like take over these little neighboring lots, almost kind of finish off the geometry and plan that's implied by that weird corner of the Bradbury, and like limit the project to just that and the facades and the atrium. I like the kind of specificity of the scope of the project. It's really nice. And so it's a pretty funny project to take on. But I like some of the stuff you're doing. Sorry.
There are a couple of references that I think would be interesting for you to look at with some fresh eyes. And I would say Gordon Motta Clark and Scarpa come to mind. And one about subtraction and one about very tactile and strategic additions, some which are mannered and then some which are so subtle and in a sense repeated intensively enough that it's through its material self-similarity that it feels as if maybe it truly has belonged for a much longer period of time than the period it was made from. And I think that in the tactility of what you are working with, whether it's the wrought iron filigree or the brick itself, you are in a sense playing in that world where there's an enduring characteristic that's being projected in a very contemporary way. And that's where I think I would urge you in looking at them to see both their strengths and weaknesses. Scarpa did incredible work when he was working with an existing ruin. But when he was asked to do something all brand new, like Banco Popolare, he failed flat on his face. He didn't quite figure it out. And in a sense, he benefited from the constraints and restraint that was, in a sense, demanded by buildings like Castelvecchio. So to some extent, you've given yourself the Castelvecchio and you've built an addition to it, and you've built an addition that is as contextual as possible with the surprise of your inventions, both the atrium and the skin. And I think that the real question of a good architect always is, what could you set aside and still perhaps have something of greater intensity to experience? And I think it's just another way of my earlier question about what might you leave out to intensify the things that are indeed so expressive and inventive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is a comment and a word that Barbara put in light before, memory, that I really loved. what is actually what is reality after the experience of reality. So in the moment actually you're remembering something, there are some truths, there are some things that you may twist or don't remember exactly, but there are moments perhaps you want to lie yourself because you want to create a narrative or change the story or change the meaning. So I think in the moment you actually bring some of your elements and you start playing with it and changing, you may also start entering some mistake inside, lie, and adding some elements that perhaps are not from the building or related to different styles, different historical moment, and so on, so that you actually create a different narrative that is a little bit less consistent, but interesting at the same time.
Yeah, the idea was to use nothing that doesn't exist in the original building. So what I argue is it doesn't fit the conventions of this kind of projects, but then everything there actually belongs to the original building. So that's why I used everything that's already here, but yeah, I'll consider it's a good idea.
I just wanted to add a couple things. It was really wonderful to work with you this summer, Ozan.
You too.
On a project that's so different than my own sensibilities, I will say that. But I loved your take on it, and mostly I appreciated the way you worked. This wasn't a 3D model that someone else did, you made it. And it makes me think of, how we used to call it eating architecture, like how do you eat precedent, or how do you understand what's there? And there's sketching, and then there's photographing, and then there's studying and looking at drawings. But there's nothing more intimate than actually building the model, either virtual or physical, at such level of detail where you literally consume it, I think. And this took weeks, basically the whole summer, while you also kind of manipulated elements. And I've never worked with a student who retained so much of previous work in such a linear way. And maybe it was part of the project built in. There weren't a lot of false starts, like, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It was extremely slow and methodical, where literally, if we appreciate the detail of the project, it's because everything was built upon and nothing was thrown out. And you have a great sensitivity towards that. I suppose we would all say that when you do that and you know something too well, it's a kind of Stockholm syndrome, where you start to fall in love with your captor. But I would say that there's a strength to the thesis. Then I would say you could argue, if you took the AC Martin DWP building and did the same thing, you could, and that it isn't relying on historic ornament only. I think the method could be applied to different things, I would argue. It just so happens this is the Bradbury building, and it'll have each project would have its own challenges with that. Finally, I wanted to note at midterm, this project, he was challenged the same way you guys have challenged him, and can you take it further? And actually, this is his version of further, right? Ozan, because we kidded about it, right? And you were like, I want to take it further. I really do. And it's okay, I mean, that's, some would say dial it back. I don't know, but you, again, in a very sensitive way, you listened and took that, you took it further in your own way. Anyway, it's been really fun working with you, and the word expertise comes up to mind, and
thank you, John.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I love that comment, John, but studying the salad and vegetables, I love that, but the studying the thing, you do develop an expertise even in a digital model, which is not exactly how the thing is made, but some kind of expertise about the project. And then by kind of just moving to the side and reusing those same pieces, you almost display some sort of, not just something new in the world, but a kind of way of us looking back at the Bradbury building in a way that we hadn't seen before, you know? And I think that that's something that when one studies something and makes something new out of it, the best thing one can do is that new thing being a way to relook at the original thing that you studied, and showing us what you know, like a new way to look at that thing. And I think that if that's the ambition for a kind of thesis like this, to some extent, at least, that's a really amazing thing to be able to do. And you've definitely done it. So yeah, I love that. If I guess you consume some salad and vegetables, maybe you've produced a fruit cocktail. I don't know.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Can I ask you the stair, the one that Jason was commenting on? What is its form origin?
So you mean, let me put an interior.
Well, first, is that the,
you mean this in the back?
Wait, is that the stair that you were talking about, Jason?
Or maybe you mean this, this one?
Oh, that, right.
So this is actually, every piece is the bird cage, the skylight.
All right. Well, I was going to suggest something. I was hoping it was something different, just for to agree with my point. So, but I'll make it anyways. Facts be damned. Now, I was thinking about this idea that there is focusing on a minor effect in architecture, an undue amount of attention to it, so that it takes on a kind of outsized importance, and in so doing it transforms and becomes something else. Is I think a little. I mean, let's say I think there is a certain. We could find architectural projects that have kind of done that, and I think yours is falling in that. I was thinking about, there was a thesis student I had a number of years ago, Lucy Liu, who she was very interested in looking at coins, you know, which are the exaggerated cornerstones in a stone buildings, you know, and you see them in stucco and Beverly Hills mansions and things. And she just made a whole building that was coin. It was like these apartments that all interlock with each other, you know? And so I just wonder, that's why I was wondering if like you suddenly, and maybe this is too literal, that if part of what they do is they go from being an ornament into something else, like a stair, or another little curly cue becomes suddenly a door. It's because it seems, and maybe some of the idea of volume and how far to go, whether it would be like you walk by and you have to do a double take before you realize it's not the Bradbury anymore. Or, you know, maybe it's stuck a little too much at just kind of a little, you know, with the postmodern discussion. But I'm wondering if like you went through the wormhole and they actually became different architectural elements than they were originally. Which I think the interior feels like it's doing that more, and the outside, you want to read it more as a kind of, right, the state it's in now is more postmodernism rather than blink twice because this is a weird swerve away from the original, or it's just something completely different. But I know these are like 20/20 hindsight. I mean, just all of your work allows me to make these observations. So
yeah. I tried not to fall into postmodern discussion actually while I was doing the project. Yeah, I wanted it more to be like a weird version. I think
KAIYUN could not believe that no one brought up the Oslo Opera House. So you can want what you want, but you know, juries are on their own.
Yeah,
their own leash.
I think that one of also the interesting aspect of the project that you know, I'm keeping watching. I like it, so I like it even more the more than I watch it. So again, congratulations, really nice project. Is also that I don't know if it was in purpose or not, but actually you didn't model everything, or you didn't have the time to model everything. And I think that actually the missing parts give all the building this sort of almost historical looking that I really, really love. It almost looks in a way like, again, an abandoned building or an old temple in a way, just because actually you took out. So there was also, there is the discourse about transformation, changing and extrapolating elements, changing scale and so on, but there is also the missing part of the elements that to me are a really strong message within your project. And I think it's, they're really, really an interesting aspect of your project. And again, the more I watch it, the more I like it.
Great. Well, this is terrific. Maybe in the few minutes we have left, unless there's a final comment, maybe we can ask the other students to come back on and see if anyone has either final comments or whatever you would like. Where are all of you? Oh, there you go. Julia. The other, I see still we have non-video participants.
It's time to celebrate now. So you guys did it.
Yeah.
I'll do a little.
Are you there?
We're gonna do it.
See you.
Yeah, we're here.
They've fallen asleep.
Hi, we're here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for the jury. Really, for those of you that I hadn't met before, it was great to meet you. For those that I have, very nice to see you again. Marion, always a pleasure. Thank you for for everyone's insights. And students, good job. Unless we're going to have a discussion when you get off to make sure this is true, but I think you've all just graduated.
Yeah. I also really appreciate the jury. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. It was really a marvelous discussion, really wonderful jury. And also, I'm so excited to see such a diversity of projects coming together here, and the ability for us to talk about them in specific ways is really exciting and encouraging. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah.
Particularly our friends in Europe.
Yeah, and so
Yeah,
what time is
it's
it
gotten
now?
dark. What happened to
now
those trees in London? Those London trees have turned into neon lights. Yeah.
My husband's just locked himself out, so I had to throw the keys out of the windows.
I see.
But no, I just add to other people's comments. It was such a pleasure to see your full projects, and thank you very much for inviting me to come along. I really was, I saw different projects in the earlier part of the thesis reviews earlier this year, and it's very nice to see this breadth of range and the imagination and the effort and the care in the projects and the sort of aspiration. So I just wanted to encourage all five of you, Matt. I think difficulty in projects is really important to grapple with. So never give up on difficulty. I think constraints are super helpful. So there's no such thing as a bad site. I think you've got to find its specialness. But the last thing I think that I would give as a parting thought is really, it's what's at stake in a project, any project, whether it's a memory project in the School of Architecture or a personal project or a real professional project. What is at stake, and what is the point at which, if you lose this particular thing, this conceptual idea or passion within the project, you have to walk away? What is the point at which you have to, what's not negotiable in your project? And that's what I'm really interested in each of your pieces of work. So, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oops. Yeah, go.
No, go ahead, Niccolo.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I really love the presentation, and I think there is also an interesting coherence between all the projects we saw today, because in different way there were things that were put on question. The first project was about the way we inhabit, the program that was questioned. The second one was about the way we experience a show, so that was questioned. Then the way we present and we communicate a project, that again was questioned. And then the last one, the building that is deconstructed and questioned in its own parts. So I think that there was a common thread and a common, let's say, issue or perhaps tendency with all of the project, and I really, really loved. And so thank you very much for making me part of this really nice experience.
Thank you.
And I just want to add to, I think, some of the observations that came through in all the projects. I think what is so interesting about a thesis is it's really about choosing the thing that you're going to work on rather than choosing everything to work on. And so as we ask questions and ask about these next chapters, it's not to say and then, but I think more to Barbara's point, what can without. And I would say the key thing is try to figure out what it is you love and find yourself losing all sense of time when you're working on it, and then unpack it to try to interrogate what it is, so that that's the very element that you take further, because indeed that's what's original to you, and that is your gift as an artist, an architect, and as a creator, because it may not be architecture as we know it. I think the query about Julia's project was, maybe the chapter 2 of architecture is not just the constructed world, but it's a speculative one that invites others into that equation. I think that it really is trying to figure out what your authorship will be in an increasingly fraught world. And I would say that the paradigm of how architecture is conducted right now is a very broken one. It's so bad, it's like healthcare, and it's a miracle that anybody gets cured by doctors or that buildings get realized. And knowing that it's a wreck means that it's a perfect time to think about what else it could be. And I would say all of you with your theses are really starting to forge a new narrative for what it could be. And I would say stay with it. Stay with it as much as you can to see how far it can go. So huge congratulations, and I'm really grateful to have been invited to the dialogue today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
That was beautifully said. I feel bad following it that more.
How do you feel, Nana?
Yeah, good job. No, just kidding. I think it's kind of no joke that architecture is broken. I also think that we live in incredibly challenging and difficult times to be centered in. And so I think the crises that are before us, the environmental crisis, I mean, LA, California, we've all seen the San Francisco pictures, is no joke. How architecture and design of spaces will change, given this will not be the last pandemic, is no joke. And at least in our country, the very, very, very serious issue of structural racism and how the architectural field has held that up is also no joke. And so it's really, we need your generation to help us with this stuff, right? So we didn't talk a lot about those issues. We were talking a lot about form today, but you have to realize that, your ideas, which were all brilliant, and I have so much hope for the future. I was like private chatting with some of the other jurors, just going, I'm so excited about the future because of all of it. But you've got to understand, someone explained it to me like this. Everyone, all these old people, all those jurors are all lived in a world where the rate of change was kind of like this. The rate of change now in the world is moving like this. And so you are in a place now where you have to understand what you're learning in school now may not even have you prepared for how much things are going to change 3 years from now. So you've got to have that kind of flexible mindset and show up with a set of morals and principles about how important it is to have your kind of creativity in the world to help us solve these issues. So I just urge you to, outside of all of this insane, difficult time and depressing stuff that's going on, to realize how beautiful your minds are and how much we need you all, and just please stay with us and do the hard work. We need you. So
thank you. Well, great. Well, thank you again, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, for hosting.
My pleasure. Listen, I hope to see you all again, but maybe in person over a drink.
That would be lovely.
Let's make that happen, shall we? That's what we really need, the optimism.
Oh, remember restaurants?
Yeah, that's right. All right,
next year.
everyone.
It'll happen next year.
Okay, bye.
Nice to see you all. Congratulations.
Hi, nice to see you. Thanks.
Congrats.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.